I am John Douglas, and as I write this journal at the tender age of 26, I am filled with a tumultuous mix of emotions. I write these entries as the memories of events flood my mind, like a movie playing inside my mind. My journey has been a treacherous one, fraught with peril and hardship. But through it all, I have remained steadfast in my beliefs, never wavering in the face of adversity. For 10 long years, I have been separated from my home, a place that once brought me comfort. But now it seems like a distant memory, a fading dream that I can barely hold on to. My days have been consumed by a constant battle, a fight for what I hold dear in a world that has become hostile to faith. As I reflect on my past, I am haunted by the memories of the trials I have faced and the sacrifices I have made. The smell of gunpowder and the taste of blood still linger in the air, reminding me of the battles I have fought. The sound of screams and the sight of fallen comrades serve as a constant reminder of the price I have paid for my convictions. But amidst the chaos and turmoil, I have encountered a cast of characters that have both intrigued and perplexed me. Some have been allies, while others have been foes, but all have left a lasting impression on my soul. Their complex and multifaceted personalities have both challenged and shaped my own understanding, forcing me to question everything I thought I knew. And through it all, my voice has remained strong and unwavering. For I am John Douglas, a man of faith and conviction, willing to risk everything for what I hold dear. And though the road ahead may be uncertain, I am ready to face whatever lies ahead with courage and determination. Journal entry 2. The seeds of this struggle were sown long before my birth, rooted in the events of when the United States government passed a law making religion illegal, branding its practice as an act of moral terrorism. The very air was thick with fear and tension, a palpable sense of impending doom hanging over the nation. The streets were lined with armed soldiers, their faces masked in cold, determination, their weapons glinting in the harsh sunlight. The smell of smoke and burning buildings permeated the air, a constant reminder of the chaos and destruction that had consumed our world. But it wasn't just the physical destruction that haunted us. It was the emotional toll that weighed heavily on our hearts. The stories shared by my parents during my childhood were filled with pain, loss, and unimaginable horrors. They spoke of innocent lives lost, of families torn apart, of a once united nation now divided by fear and hate. It all began with a seemingly harmless protest in Dallas, Texas, with approximately 750,000 demonstrators gathered. But it quickly spiraled out of control as tensions between the protesters and the police reached a boiling point. The streets were soon ablaze with violence, and the once peaceful protest turned into a bloodbath. Unarmed and defenseless, the protesters were mercilessly gunned down by the authorities, their screams and cries echoing through the streets. The news of this horrific event spread like wildfire, igniting riots in major cities worldwide. And as the death toll climbed into the millions, the global governments made their decision: religion had to be eradicated from the world. It was seen as the root of all evil, the cause of the destruction and chaos that had consumed us. In the aftermath of what would come to be known as the riot, the U.S. government formed an organization called the Guard. They claimed to be soldiers and mercenaries, tasked with protecting Americans from the perceived threat of religion. But in reality, they were fanatical and brutal, empowered to execute anyone who dared to practice their faith. The Guard's fleet of vehicles served dual purposes, transporting rare prisoners and unleashing devastation upon villages and families. They were a constant reminder of the oppressive regime that ruled over us, a symbol of our shattered world. As governments collapsed and people fled, those who remained steadfast in their faith became perpetual fugitives. They were constantly on the run, evading the clutches of the Guard and fighting for their right to believe. But as the years passed and the death toll climbed to a staggering 2.5 billion, even the most devout began to question their faith. This was the world I was born into, a world torn apart by fear and hate, a world where survival meant sacrificing your beliefs. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still hope, that there were others like me who refused to give up. And so I joined the fight, determined to bring back the light that had been extinguished by the Guard's reign of terror. The Navajo Reservation in Arizona, known as the Fide Desert, offered a glimmer of hope to those seeking refuge. The harsh landscape provided a sanctuary from the cruel grasp of the Guard. In Shadow Valley, nestled in the western corner of Death Valley, California, some found solace in the midst of chaos. But for others, the only comfort was rumored to be found in caves or underground, living like animals in order to survive. Isolated from the rest of the United States, we clung to our false sense of safety. We were the faithful, living in a self-imposed exile, constantly looking over our shoulders for any sign of danger. Each day was a struggle filled with fear and uncertainty. But we had no choice but to keep moving forward, driven by the hope that tomorrow would bring a better existence. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, our hearts became more complex. We were survivors, hardened by the challenges we faced. Our senses were heightened, constantly on alert for any potential threat. We had to be cunning and resourceful in order to survive, for the guard showed no mercy to those who dared to defy them. But even as we fought to stay alive, our emotions were raw and intense. The constant threat of danger, the loss of loved ones, and the never-ending struggle for survival took its toll on us. We were a community bound together by our shared experiences, yet each of us carried our own burden of pain and suffering. And through it all, our voices remained strong and defiant. We were the faithful, and we refused to be broken by the guard. We may have been exiled from society, but we were united in our determination to fight for our freedom and our right to live without fear. Our story was one of resilience and strength, a testament to the human spirit in the face of adversity. Journal entry 3. As the relentless sun beat down on the barren land, our family welcomed a new life into the world. My parents, battle-worn and weary yet determined, had already raised 2 children in the unforgiving Fide desert. But as they held their 3rd child, a sense of fear and uncertainty gripped them. How could they protect another fragile life in this harsh and unforgiving world? But they soldiered on, with my older siblings James and Ruth by their side. And on a hot summer day in June, I entered this world, my cries echoing against the scorching sand and unforgiving winds. And just 3 years later, we were blessed with the arrival of my little sister Mary. But our joy was short-lived, for the following year marked the beginning of a grueling ordeal for our community. A merciless drought settled upon us, draining the land of its life-giving resources. Wells and streams dried up, crops withered away, and even the hardiest of animals succumbed to malnutrition and dehydration, with no doctors for hundreds of miles and barely enough water to sustain ourselves. Despair settled upon us like a suffocating blanket. And in the midst of it all, my little sister Mary fell ill. Just 1 year old, she was stranded in a land that offered no mercy. My parents, already stretched thin by the drought, did everything they could to save her. But as the months passed, our hope dwindled. Mary's fever raged on, her coughing and incessant crying a constant reminder of our powerlessness. But then, as if by some miracle, Mary's laughter echoed through our home. My mother cradled her in her arms, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the unexpected transformation. My father rushed to her side, his face awash with relief as he saw his baby girl's infectious smile and heard her giggles. The drought may have taken everything from us, but it could not take away our joy as we watched Mary regain her health. Her laughter and smiles filled our home once again, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. And finally, after 3 long years, the drought came to an end. Rain fell from the sky, drenching the parched land and bringing new life to the desert. Our wells brimmed with water, and the streams and springs in the mountains overflowed. And on this wondrous day, my youngest brother, Matt, was born. With his arrival, our family felt complete. Mother and father, James, Ruth, Mary, Matt, and I, we were a complete and happy family, even amidst the challenges of raising 5 children in the unforgiving Fide desert. But little did we know that there were still challenges ahead, challenges that would test our strength, our resolve, and our faith once again. But for now, we basked in the joy of our family, a family that had faced the harshest of trials and emerged stronger than ever before. And as the winds of the Fide desert raged on, we stood together, united in our love and determination to overcome whatever challenges came our way. Journal entry 4. The years that followed were a delicate dance between fleeting moments of joy and persistent waves of apprehension. The Fide desert, with its vast stretches of arid land, bore witness to the struggle of a community clinging to the remnants of their faith. The scorching sun beat down on the barren landscape, mirroring the unrelenting hardships that plagued our people. Our family, like many others, sought refuge in the rituals and traditions passed down through generations. In the shadows of our homes, we whispered prayers that intertwined with the rustle of desert winds. The sand beneath our feet held the memories of our ancestors, their resilience embedded in every grain. As I grew older, I saw the toll that the world had taken on my family and our community. The once vibrant society was reduced to mere whispers of faith, hidden behind closed doors. The Fide Desert, though offering a semblance of safety, was not immune to the atrocities that ravaged the world outside. The scars of the riot were etched into the landscape, mirroring the wounds on the hearts of those who clung to their beliefs in secrecy. The wind that swept across the desert carried the echoes of distant prayers, spoken softly and furtively. The stars above, once a celestial tapestry admired in reverence, now bore witness to the clandestine gatherings held under their shimmering gaze. Each member of our community carried a burden, a weight that threatened to crush us under its weight. But still, we persevered, driven by the faith that burned within us. In this harsh and unforgiving landscape, our characters were forged and tested. Our faith was our shield, our traditions our guiding light. And though we may have been battered and scarred, we stood tall, our voices rich with the strength of our convictions. For in the Fide Desert, we were not just survivors, but warriors, fighting for our beliefs and our very existence. The nights in the Fide Desert were eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional blood-curdling howl of a distant coyote or the haunting, bone-chilling call of a desert owl. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, engulfing us in its suffocating embrace. But it was in these silent moments that my siblings and I would gather, drawn to the flickering light of a dimly lit lantern. Huddled together in the secrecy of our home, we would share stories of a time when the world was different. Our parents, with eyes that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears, would speak in hushed tones of the beauty of diversity and the richness of human connection before the riot cast its dark and destructive shadow over our lives. As I sat there, listening to their words, I couldn't help but feel a sense of longing for the world they described. A world where differences were celebrated, not feared, where the colors of our skin and the beliefs in our hearts were not used as weapons against us. But it was also a world that seemed so far out of reach, a distant memory fading into the darkness. My siblings and I were not just survivors of the riot, we were its victims. We had lost everything, our home, our community, and our sense of belonging. But amidst the destruction, we clung to each other, finding solace in our shared experiences and a fierce determination to never let go. Our parents, once strong and vibrant, now bore the scars of that fateful night, the weight of their burden evident in every line on their faces, every tremble in their voices. But they were our guiding lights, our protectors, and our pillars of strength. As I listened to their stories, my heart ached with a mix of nostalgia and grief. I longed for the world they spoke of, but I also knew that it could never be the same. We were forever changed, marked by the events of that night. But in the darkness of the Fide Desert, surrounded by my family, I found a glimmer of hope. A hope that one day we would rise from the ashes and rebuild our world together, stronger than ever before. Journal entry 5. The desert air was thick with the scent of sand and ancient knowledge, stirring my senses as I entered my teenage years. A yearning for understanding gripped me, clawing at my very soul. The world outside the Fide Desert loomed like a vast unknown, its secrets taunting me with their elusive nature. The stories passed down through generations were mere fragments of a reality that continued to elude me. But then, a spark of defiance ignited within me, fueled by a desire to challenge the imposed silence and uncover the truth that had been shrouded in secrecy for far too long. It was a flame that burned bright, casting a light on the dusty volumes in our makeshift library. Each page revealed a world that once thrived on the tapestry of diverse beliefs, a world where the concept of faith was not synonymous with terror. As I delved deeper into the past, the picture became clearer. The riot, though a cataclysmic event, was not the beginning of the world's troubles. It was a symptom of deeper-rooted issues that had festered for centuries. The unraveling had started long before, in a time when intolerance and fear lurked beneath the veneer of progress. And with this newfound knowledge came a sense of responsibility, a weight that settled heavily on my shoulders. The legacy of my family, intertwined with the legacy of faith itself, beckoned me to be more than a passive observer. The Fide Desert, once a refuge, now became the backdrop of my internal struggle, a battleground where I would confront not only the guard but the shadows of history that sought to keep the truth hidden. But I would not be deterred. I would not let fear or doubt hold me back from seeking the truth no matter the cost. For within me burned a fire that could not be extinguished, a fire that would illuminate the darkest corners of history, and reveal the complex and intriguing characters that lay hidden within its pages. And with each step, each revelation, my voice grew stronger, fueled by the emotions that pulsed through me, determined to uncover the truth and challenge the very foundations of the world as I knew it. The winds whispered tales of resistance, their haunting voices carrying on the breeze and stirring a deep sense of longing within me. I could almost taste the dust of the Fide Desert, feel the warmth of the sun on my skin, and hear the echoes of footsteps that had once walked its sands with purpose. It was a land scarred by the remnants of a fractured world, yet still alive with the embers of faith. My siblings, each with their own unique story, stood beside me with a shared purpose. James, with his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, became my confidant in the journey ahead. Ruth, her spirit unbreakable despite the trials she had faced, embraced the call to challenge the imposed silence. Mary, who had once defied the clutches of illness, carried a resilience that echoed in the unwavering gaze of her piercing blue eyes. And young Matt, born in the midst of a renewed hope, embodied the spirit of a future untainted by the shadows of the guard. We were a family bound not only by blood, but by a legacy steeped in courage and determination. And as we stood at the precipice of change, the weight of our past bearing down on us, we knew that the time had come to reclaim what had been stolen from us. With the stars above as our witnesses, we whispered our prayers and set out on a journey that would define not just our fate, but the fate of a world desperate for redemption. The legacy, though heavy with the burden of a tumultuous past, held within it the promise of a future where faith would rise from the ashes, resilient and unyielding. But little did we know that the road ahead would test us in ways we could never have imagined. As we delved into the layers of history, confronting demons that had long been lurking in the shadows, we would come to understand the true power of our legacy. And as our story unfolded, it would cast ripples through the annals of time, igniting a fire within the hearts of those who had long been silenced. This is the story of our family, a story of courage, resilience, and unwavering faith. This is the legacy we carry, a legacy that will shape the destiny of a world in need of redemption. Journal Entry 6. It was a treacherous journey to the mountains, a time to immerse ourselves in the raw beauty of nature and escape the turmoil of our troubled world. My brother James, a fierce and skilled hunter, my father, a stoic and weathered figure, and I, a young and eager apprentice, set out with determination to find game to sustain our village. Our worn boots treaded upon the familiar paths of the Fide Desert, but this trip held a sense of anticipation. Before the tragic events that shattered our world, our days in the desert followed the rhythmic patterns set by the sun and the winds. Our village, a resilient cluster of weather-beaten homes, stood tall against the harsh and unforgiving landscape. Each morning, we were awakened by the gentle whispers of the wind, carrying the promise of a new day. Our father, a man of few words but a wealth of experience, led our family in the rituals of survival. The clinking of metal pots and the murmur of whispered prayers filled the dusty dawn air. Our mother, a pillar of strength and grace, performed sacred rituals passed down through generations. The earthy scent of burning sage lingered, a reminder of our heritage and connection to the land. At the communal well, a lifeline in this barren expanse, women gathered to draw water and share stories. Children's laughter echoed through the narrow alleys, a fleeting melody in the vast silence of the desert. Elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of enduring hardships, gathered in the shade of makeshift shelters to pass down the tales of our people. The routine of life was marked by a quiet resilience, a collective understanding that survival required unity. Our family, the Douglas family, played a crucial role in the intricate tapestry of our village. My siblings and I, under the guidance of our parents, navigated the challenges of an existence shaped by the aftermath of the riot. Before tragedy struck, our father's laughter would fill our modest home. He would regale us with stories of a time when faith was not a liability and the world was not consumed by fear and intolerance. These tales, woven with threads of hope and nostalgia, were the fragile bridges connecting us to a past that felt increasingly distant. The Douglas household, despite the shadows that loomed over our world, was a sanctuary of warmth and familial love. Our mother, a beacon of unwavering strength, instilled in us the values that defined our legacy. She taught us to find solace in the quiet moments and draw strength from the shared rituals that bound our family together. Our father, marked by the scars of a world that had turned against his beliefs, found solace in his communion with nature. The hunting trips, more than a means of sustenance, had become a sacred tradition, a connection to a world that existed beyond the suffocating grip of the guard. As we climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew thinner, and the scent of pine trees filled our nostrils. The wind whipped through our hair, and the sun beat down upon our skin, reminding us of the harshness of our reality. But we pushed on, driven by a sense of duty and a burning desire to escape the confines of our village and immerse ourselves in the untamed wilderness. With each step, our senses became heightened and our hearts pounded with adrenaline. The thrill of the hunt coursed through our veins, and the anticipation of a successful trip filled us with renewed hope. But little did we know our journey would soon take a devastating turn, forever altering our lives and the fate of our village. Journal Entry 7. On the eve of that fateful hunting trip, our home was filled with the alluring aroma of a simple meal prepared with love. A fresh hot stew that Mother made, carrots, tomatoes, beets, onion, potato, oats, and some chicken, along with. That was also her rolls she made, soft and fluffy inside, golden toasted on the outside, and a hint of honey to sweeten them up. There was also the gentle glow of a lantern, casting dancing shadows on the walls, enveloping us in a warm embrace that was in contrast with the desolation beyond our doorstep. As we savored each bite, our father's eyes held a distant gaze, his weathered face betraying the weight of his responsibilities as the patriarch of the Douglas family. The next morning, the crisp morning air greeted us with the sense of anticipation as the first rays of light painted the desert horizon in hues of gold. The majestic mountains, towering over us with their imposing presence, beckoned us with promises of sustenance and the calming peace of nature. Our family, bound by a fierce love and unbreakable bonds, set out on our hunting expedition. Days had passed, and despite our best efforts, we found no signs of life, no tracks, no sounds, just an eerie silence that hung over us in the air. Confusion eventually gave way to concern, and after 3 long and enduring days yielding no game, we made the difficult decision to turn back. Little did we know, tragedy was lurking just around the corner. Before the world shifted beneath our feet, our father's laughter echoed through the mountain passes, a melody that harmonized with the timeless rhythm of nature. The routine of daily life, marked by shared prayers and the comforting presence of our loved ones, had prepared us for the challenges that awaited on that fateful hunting trip. Our family, though scarred by the legacy of the riot, was a complex tapestry woven with threads of resilience and determination. Our household, a sanctuary of hope and unwavering faith, stood as a testament to the enduring flame that burned within us. However, as the events on the mountainside unfolded, the fabric of our daily life unraveled. The laughter that once echoed through our home was replaced with the haunting silence of grief. The scent of burning sage, once a source of comfort, now carried the weight of sorrow. Before the tragedy, our daily life was a delicate dance between survival and the celebration of fleeting moments of joy. As we braved the unforgiving realities of the Fide Desert, the legacy of our family intertwined with the collective struggles of our village. The flame inside us, ignited by the routines of daily life, refused to be extinguished by the shadows that threatened to engulf our world. And so, as we faced the aftermath of that ill-fated hunting trip, the flame inside us continued to burn, brighter and stronger than ever before. It served as a beacon of hope, guiding us through the trials that awaited in the harsh desert, where the echoes of the riot lingered and the legacy of the Douglas family would be put to the ultimate test. With each passing day, our souls grew more intriguing and complex, shaped by the challenges we faced and the bonds that held us together. Emotions ran high, from the warmth of love and joy to the depths of grief and despair. And through it all, our voices grew richer and more distinct, painting a vivid picture of our journey through the unforgiving desert and the trials that awaited us. Journal Entry 8. It was a hunting trip to the rugged mountains, a time to reconnect with nature and escape the daily struggles of life. My brother James, my father, and I set out with determination, hoping to bring back enough game to sustain our village. These lands were familiar to us, having hunted them countless times before, but this trip would prove to be unlike any other. The first few days were uneventful, with no signs of life. No tracks to follow, no sounds to guide us, just an eerie stillness that hung heavy in the air. We pushed on, driven by. Past, our confusion turned to concern. Something was amiss. On the 3rd day, we made the difficult decision to turn back and return home empty-handed. As we descended the treacherous mountain, tragedy struck with a sudden and brutal force. The air was thick with the stench of fear and uncertainty, the ground trembling beneath our feet. The icy wind howled, whipping through our hair and chilling us to the bone. My father led the way, his tall and sturdy figure a beacon of strength and determination. But then, in an instant, everything changed. My father stumbled on a loose rock, and I watched in horror as his body tumbled down the steep slope, battered by jagged rocks and branches. His cries of pain echoed through the valley, haunting me and James to our core. I couldn't do anything except stand there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as his lifeless form came to a stop at the base of the mountain. The ground seemed to shake with the weight of our loss, the earth stained with my father's blood. My brother and I were paralyzed with shock, unable to comprehend the sudden and senseless tragedy that had befallen us. Time stood still as we struggled to process the reality of our father's death. We had always thought of him as an unbreakable figure, a pillar of strength and protection. But in that moment, as we stood on the mountain with his lifeless body at our feet, we were forced to confront the harsh truth that he was gone, forever. As we made the long journey down the mountain, the heavy burden of grief weighed us down. The once majestic landscape now seemed bleak and desolate, mirroring our shattered hearts. Memories of our father flooded our minds, each one a painful reminder of what we had lost. When we finally arrived at the bottom of the mountain, we sorrowfully approached our father's body. Stricken by grief, I fell to my knees, wailing out to the sky, lashing out in anger and sadness to God, the universe, whoever was in charge of this reality. Suddenly, I felt a stinging sensation from my face. The stinging turned to pain. James had slapped me so hard, but with that slap, I regained focus on what was needed of us in this moment. James knelt down and picked our father up off the ground and put him on his back. He yelled for me to go get Mother, and so I did. I ran as hard as I could. I struggled to breathe the closer I got to the village. But, I continued, I ran back to our village, my heart heavy with the weight of the devastating news I had to deliver to our mother. Bursting through the door, I could see the fear and dread etched on Mother's face. She already knew, even before I spoke a word, that something terrible had happened. Together, we rushed outside and started running back to where my brother was carrying our father's lifeless body. Our mother's anguished cries filled the air, her prayers a desperate plea for a miracle, but it was too late. Our father was gone, and no amount of pleading could bring him back. My mother's grief was raw and palpable, her pain almost tangible. She fell to her knees when she saw my brother carrying our father, her cries piercing the silence. I tried to comfort her, to ease her pain, but she pushed me away. James gently placed father on the ground. Mother's only desire was to be with our father, to hold him one last time. She crawled to his lifeless form, clutching him tightly as tears streamed down her face. It was a heart-wrenching sight, one that my brother and I could hardly bear to witness. As the sun began to set, we gently urged our mother to return to the village, knowing that we had to lay our father to rest. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the weight of our loss, I felt an overwhelming feeling of loneliness. I knew I had my family there, but I felt alone in this tragedy. Journal Entry 9. This hunting trip was meant to be a simple journey to provide for our village, but it became a journey that would forever change us. Our father, gone too, soon left a void in our hearts that could never be filled. And though we would carry on, we would never forget the tragic events that unfolded in those mountains. The weight of our father's lifeless body lay heavy in our arms as we carried him back home. The once lively and vibrant man was now a mere shell, a stark reminder of the void that now existed in our lives. As we laid him on the table, the coldness of his skin sent shivers down our spines, a haunting reminder of our loss. James, usually composed and stoic, was now consumed by grief. He stormed off, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls as he went to dig a grave for our father. Ruth, who always wore a strong facade, stayed by his side, her tears hidden from our view, but I could see the pain etched in her features, the cracks in her armor. Mary and Matt, our innocent younger siblings, were awakened by the commotion. We shielded them from the sight of their deceased father, trying to protect their young minds from the harsh reality of death. I reassured them that everything would be all right, hiding the truth of our loss behind a comforting smile. I went upstairs with them, explaining that James and Ruth were fighting over something. A lie to cover up the saddening truth, my heart sank further. With Mary safely tucked in bed, I tucked Matt in and listened as he prayed for peace. His innocent words brought a fleeting smile to my face, a brief respite from the overwhelming grief that consumed me. But as I returned downstairs, the weight of our loss settled upon me once again. My mother stood by our father's body, her hand clutching his lifeless one, I offered my apologies for being unable to save him, but she shook her head and told me not to blame myself. She believed it was fate, that if not our father, it could have been me. Her words brought a new wave of guilt and sadness, but I pushed it down, knowing I had to be strong for my family. She then instructed me to check on James, and I stepped outside to find him digging our father's grave. Each shovelful of dirt felt like a stab in my heart, and tears blurred my vision. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let James bear this burden alone. The pain was unbearable, but I pushed through it, my determination fueled by my love for my family. James, usually so composed, was uncharacteristically emotional. He embraced me tightly, and in that moment we made a silent vow to protect our family and honor our father's memory. Together we finished our father's final resting place, our hands raw and blistered from the labor. As we carried our father's lifeless body to his grave, the moon hung low in the night sky, casting a solemn glow over the desolate landscape. The world seemed hushed, and in the stillness, I heard the rhythm of my own heartbeat, the blood rushing through my veins and the creaking of tree branches halfway down the block. But most of all, I heard James's breathing, a constant reminder of our shared grief. We laid our father to rest, our mother speaking to him as if it were any other day, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But in that moment, as we closed the door and were enveloped in silence, the weight of his absence settled upon us. The once lively and bustling home now felt empty and quiet, but we knew we had to carry on, for the sake of our family and our father's memory. We had taken on a new role, guardians of the Douglas name, and we were determined to fulfill our responsibilities, no matter the pain it may bring. Journal Entry 10. The days that followed were a whirlwind of mourning and adjustment. The once vibrant Douglas household now lay cloaked in a somber stillness. The absence of our father was a palpable ache, a void that no amount of hushed prayers could fill. Our mother, usually a rock of strength, retreated into herself, lost in a sea of sorrow. The daily routines we once took for granted now became a silent symphony of grief, each movement a painful reminder of the life we had lost. James and I, the surviving sons, shouldered the burden of responsibilities that our father once carried, determined to keep our family afloat in this harsh and unforgiving desert. The hunting trips, once a mere means of survival, now held a sacred significance. It was our duty to carry on our father's legacy, to keep his spirit alive through the very land he had roamed. Every step we took on the familiar mountain trails echoed with his laughter, a poignant reminder of the void that he left behind. But each day, the weight of our grief threatened to consume us. Yet, deep within our chests, a fire raged on, refusing to be snuffed out. In our small village, once a tight-knit community, we found solace in the shared pain of loss. The villagers, with their own stories of loved ones taken by the guard, offered a comforting embrace in our time of need. Journal Entry 11. As the sun set over the vast expanse of the Fide Desert, the sky would ignite in hues of fiery orange and soft pink, casting a bittersweet glow on our humble village. The wind, with its gentle whispers, carried the memories of our father, intertwining with the prayers offered for his departed soul. Life continued on, as it always does. Meals were prepared, children ran and played in the narrow streets, and the elders gathered to share their wisdom. But beneath the facade of normalcy, a simmering tension lingered. The legacy of the riot, a distant memory for some, now resurfaced in the shadows that lurked in our village. As guardians of the Douglas name, James and I bore not only the weight of our personal loss, but the collective suffering of those who dared to hold on to their faith. Our father's legacy burned within us, a beacon of hope and a call to action. We would not stand idly by as oppression sought to extinguish the flames of belief in our village. With each passing day, the flame inside us grew brighter. It was a constant reminder of our loss, a reminder that threatened to consume us. But we refused to let it. We held on to the memories of our father, memories that fueled a resilient fire within us. Yet, despite our determination, there was a constant tug-of-war within our hearts. The grief that had once united us now divided us. James and I, once inseparable brothers, now found ourselves at odds. Our grief had brought out the worst in us, turning us into bitter rivals. Yet, we couldn't bring ourselves to let go of our pain. It was the only connection we had left to our father. As we struggled to find solace in our grief, the daily rituals of survival took on a renewed purpose. We hunted not just for sustenance, but as a way to release our pent-up anger and frustration. Our prayers under the moonlit sky were no longer for peace, but for vengeance. And the communal gatherings were filled with tension and resentment. as we all struggled to cope with our shared loss. But even as we defied the world that sought to extinguish our flickering flames of faith, doubts began to creep in. Were we really doing the right thing? Were we becoming the very thing our Father had taught us to fight against? The weight of these questions only added to our inner turmoil, and yet we couldn't stop. Our mother, forever marked by the loss of her husband, found solace in the collective embrace of our village, and we couldn't let her down. We were now the leaders of a silent rebellion, a rebellion that went against everything our Father stood for, but we were willing to do whatever it took to protect our family and our community. As the flame inside us burned with a quiet intensity, it became a constant reminder of our conflicting emotions. It was a beacon of hope, but also a source of guilt and doubt. We were torn between honoring our Father's legacy and succumbing to the darkness that threatened to consume us. And as we faced the challenges of each day, the legacy of our Father guided us, but it also weighed heavily on our shoulders. We were determined to carry on his legacy, but at what cost? Would we lose ourselves in the process? These thoughts tormented us, but we pushed them aside, knowing that our Father's memory was at stake. In the heart of our grief-stricken existence, the flame inside us continued to burn, casting its warm glow over the legacy of the Douglas family. But as the trials and tribulations of the Fide Desert tested us, we began to question if it was all worth it. The constant inner conflict threatened to tear us apart, but we held on, knowing that the flame inside us was a symbol of our resilience, our determination, and our unbreakable spirit. Journal entry 12. The pain in our lives lingered, a constant reminder of what we had lost. It had been 2 years since our father's passing, and I was now 16 years old. The cool autumn air enveloped us as my brother James and I made our way back to the mountain, the place where our lives had changed forever. Our sisters Mary and Ruth tended to the crops in the plains, while our younger brother Matt was at the schoolhouse. At home, our mother prepared dinner for us. The memories of the past weighed heavily on our minds as we went about our daily chores. The fear that had plagued our village since the riot still hung in the air, a haunting presence that we could never escape. The events leading up to that fateful day were marked by a fragile equilibrium, a thin veil of normalcy that masked the underlying tension and fear. Our very existence was sustained by the routine of our tasks, but the echoes of our father's laughter lingered, a bittersweet reminder of what we had lost. Despite our efforts to carry on with our lives, the truth was always there, looming over us like a dark cloud. The guard, our relentless pursuers, were still out there, searching for us. The memories of our father's death, the tragic result of a hunting trip gone wrong, and the constant threat of the guard's presence cast a long, ominous shadow over our community. But even in the midst of this darkness, there were moments of light. The beauty of the autumn leaves, the sound of our mother's voice as she called us in for dinner, the warmth of the sun on our skin. These were the small moments that brought us hope and a sense of peace amidst the chaos. And as we continued our tasks, we found solace in each other's company and the unspoken bond that held us together as a family. Journal entry 13. As we made our way down the mountain on that ominous autumn day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my stomach. It was as if an invisible force was pulling me back, warning me of the impending danger that lay ahead. As we reached the base of the mountain and saw the dust cloud in the distance, my heart dropped. I knew exactly what it meant. The guard was on the move, and they were heading straight for the plains where our sisters were. Panic set in as we saw people frantically running, with the guard hot on their heels. James urgently grabbed my shirt, fear etched on his face as he told me to run back to the village and warn everyone. But a voice in my head whispered, "What about our sisters?" My gut twisted in turmoil as I stood frozen, torn between protecting my family and fulfilling my duty to the village. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards the village while James rushed to help our sisters. But with every step I took, guilt gnawed at me. I could hear our sisters' screams in my head, begging for someone to save them. But I had left them behind, alone and defenseless. As I ran through the narrow paths of our village, my mind was consumed with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, I wanted to do everything in my power to protect my family and friends. But on the other hand, I knew that by doing so, I would be going against everything I had been taught, to put the needs of the village above my own. Journal entry 14. Reaching the village, I shouted with every ounce of my strength, warning everyone about the guard's approach. But as I saw the fear on the faces of the villagers, I couldn't help but question whether I had made the right choice. Was I really doing the right thing by putting their safety above that of my own family? I I ran to the school to find Matt, instructing him to go straight home and inform our mother that the guard were on their way to the village. But as I saw the look of fear and confusion in his eyes, I knew that I was only adding to the burden he carried. He was just a child, and yet here I was, forcing him to grow up too soon and make difficult decisions. So we ran out of the school together, but shortly after, we split in opposite directions. My heart ached, knowing I could do more to help the people of the village. But what could I do? I was still a kid myself. Like a beacon of inspiration, I knew what I could do. My path led me to the town center, where I kicked open the door and rushed in to ring the town bell, sounding the alarm. But as the sound echoed through the village, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. The sound was a call to arms, a signal for everyone to come together and fight for our village. But here I was, running away and leaving my family behind. With the bell still ringing in the background, I ran back home as fast as I could. But with every step, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. The sounds of distress followed me, haunting my every step. The screams of men, women, and children pierced the air behind me, fueling my desperation. Tears streamed down my face as I thought about the horrors the guard inflicted upon those they captured. My entire body trembled as I watched the ruthless execution methods. Each shot to the legs, each hanging, each blast from their infamous Excalibur shotguns brought a new wave of terror. I could feel my soul being destroyed right along with the victims. The atmosphere was thick with fear, and the sound of death echoed in the air. "Please have mercy," I heard someone plead, their voice trembling with desperation. But the executioners remained unfazed, their faces cold and indifferent as they carried out their brutal punishments. The metallic smell of blood, mixed with the stench of death, filled the air, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene, despite the horror and disgust I felt. These were not just executions, they were acts of cruelty and torture. The cruel methods used were meant to send a message of terror and fear to anyone who dared to defy them. I could hear the sound of bones breaking, the screams of agony, and the eerie silence that followed each execution. It was a chilling reminder of the power these executioners held, and the fate that awaited anyone who crossed them. In that moment, I knew I had to find a way to escape this brutal world, before I became just another victim of their merciless methods. And as I thought about my sisters facing such a fate, I could feel a fire burning inside me, urging me to turn back and save them. But I knew it was too late. I had already made my choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. Journal entry 15. I arrived at home. I burst through the front door, collapsing to the ground in sheer anguish. I sobbed uncontrollably, feeling the weight of the situation crushing my spirit. I grappled with the overwhelming emotions of the moment. I couldn't escape the fact that it was my actions that had put them in danger. After what felt like an eternity, my mother and Matt lifted me up, trying to console me. The tenderness of the moment, the shared grief and fear, bound us together in a profound connection. But even as I held on to my family, I couldn't shake off the guilt and regret that consumed me. Matt, with his innocent eyes and tousled hair, looked up to me with a mixture of confusion and concern. And in that moment, I knew that I had failed him. I had failed my family, my village, and myself. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders as I realized I needed to guide him through the unfolding chaos. But how could I lead him when I couldn't even trust my own judgment? As I waited to catch my breath, my heart raced and my senses were on high alert. The musty smell of the basement mingled with the aroma of my mother's cooking, creating a bittersweet scent that seemed to linger in the air. In the corner of my eye, I could see the flickering flames of the fireplace, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was a familiar sight, one that would normally bring a sense of comfort and warmth. But now, it only added to the tension. My mother's face was etched with lines of worry and exhaustion, but her eyes still held a fierce determination. She had been through so much, yet she remained strong for us. I couldn't help but admire her, even in the midst of chaos and danger. As I recounted the events of today that led me right here, in this moment, to her, I could see her emotions shifting from shock to fear to anger. The pain of a parent whose children were in danger was etched in every line on her face. I attempted to explain what me and James had seen, the decisions we had made, the decisions I had made. Out of breath and still feeling my heart ached for our village and my family when I finished speaking, her hand shot out and landed with a resounding slap on my cheek. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that we were in a dire situation and every second counted. The urgency of our situation was palpable. We needed to leave the village, and we needed to do it quickly. The tension in the room was thick, making it hard to breathe. Every detail, no matter how small, felt like a matter of life and death. I turned to my brother Matt, his normally carefree demeanor replaced with a look of determination. I could see the fear in his eyes, but he didn't waver. He grabbed a bag and started packing a change of clothes, while I instructed him to also gather some important documents and supplies. My mother, in the meantime, hurried to pack food and water for our journey. The kitchen, once a warm and inviting place, now felt like a battlefield. But my mother worked with a sense of urgency, her movements quick and precise. I made my way to my father's safe in the basement, retrieving weapons that we would need for protection. I grabbed everything in reach and loaded bag after bag. The cold metal of the guns, the sharpness of the knives, and the weight in my hands all served as a grim reminder of the harsh reality of our existence. Journal entry 16. As we made our final preparations and the bags were packed, I felt a sense of dread and despair wash over me. The anticipation and fear were suffocating, and I couldn't help but wonder what awaited us outside the safety of our home. With a heavy heart, I ascended the stairs, each creak of the wooden steps echoing in the silent house. It was a haunting melody, one that underscored the gravity of our situation, and as I reached the door, I knew that it was a threshold. Between the known and the unknown, the safety of our home and the dangers that awaited us outside. My mother, with her unwavering strength and fierce love for her family. Matt, usually carefree and lighthearted, now showing a side of determination and courage. And myself, caught between fear and determination, trying to keep my family safe. This was not just a story of survival, but also one of strong emotions. The fear, the urgency, the desperation, and the hope all blended together to create a roller coaster of emotions. The deafening and thunderous roar of the Excalibur shot pierced through the air, shattering any sense of calm that remained. My heart raced as I heard my mother's terrified screams and the chaotic thrashing of the guard inside our home. But amidst the chaos, I could feel all hope draining from my body. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, suffocating me with fear and uncertainty. In that moment, I could do nothing but mutter prayers, the words escaping my lips in a desperate plea for some kind of salvation. I don't even remember the words I spoke, attempting to bargain with a higher power, pleading for something to change the situation. But as I stood at the top of the stairs, my mind clouded with panic. All I could do was cling to the hope that this was all just a terrible nightmare, and that I would soon wake up safe and sound in my bed. But as the chaos raged on, I knew deep down that this was all too real. With a deep breath, I steeled myself for what awaited on the other side of that door. In the midst of the chaos, I could feel every sense heightened. The smell of smoke and burning wood filled my nostrils. The taste of gunpowder and fear lingered on my tongue, my eyes blackening the peripheral and narrowing my sight, and my skin prickled with the sensation of danger. And as I braced myself to face the unknown, I couldn't help but wonder what fate awaited me on the other side of that door. The day, once simple and familiar, had become more painful and complex in the face of this crisis. My mother, usually a pillar of strength, was now reduced to a terrified and helpless victim, and the guard, once upon a time a symbol of protection and security, was now a violent force of destruction. But in the face of such danger, I found myself tapping into strength and resilience I never knew I had. With each step towards that door, I could feel the person that I am evolving, transforming into a warrior ready to fight for my family's survival. As I finally pushed open the door and stepped into the chaos, I knew that this was a defining moment in my story. A moment that would shape me into a stronger, more determined soul. A moment that would forever change the trajectory and life I had planned for myself. Steading. Myself, I took in one last deep breath, ready to face the unknown, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. Journal entry 17. If only I had been faster. If only I had taken a different path. The weight of regret hung heavy in the air, a suffocating presence that clung to every corner of the basement. The musty smell of damp concrete mixed with the metallic tang of blood assaulted my nose. I could feel the coolness of the concrete floor beneath my palms, my fingers tracing the cracks and crevices as if searching for an answer. The flickering light cast distorted shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil within. I replayed the events in my mind desperately, trying to change the outcome, but no matter how much I wished for it, the truth remained unchanged. What happened, happened. No amount of regret or guilt could alter the cruel reality before me. As I stepped through the doorway from the basement, the world outside seemed distorted, as if reality itself had shattered. Tears welled up in my eyes, Tears of pain, sorrow, and seething. Anger. The gunshot I heard, the shot that silenced me, had taken Matt's life. My dear baby brother, too young and innocent to die by the guard's hands. When I saw his lifeless body lying at the foot of the staircase, his cowboy hat, covering his face, everything went silent. The weight of the loss consumed me. I dropped everything I held and rushed to him, kneeling beside him, tightly embracing his lifeless form. Though I couldn't hear it, I knew my mother's scream still pierced the air, paralyzed by shock. As I cradled Matt in my arms, one of the guard approached from behind and struck the back of my head with his Excalibur. The guards laughed callously, finding twisted amusement in the situation. But as I lay on the ground, the taste of blood in my mouth, I couldn't help but feel a sense of determination wash over me. I refused to let them win, to let them take everything from me. I rose to my feet, the room spinning around me, and turned towards the guard who had attacked me. As I stood there, staring down at him, he attempted to raise his Excalibur against me. But before he could grasp it firmly, I had already lifted him off the floor. My hand tightened around his neck, the anger and grief fueling my strength as I held him against the wall. I could feel his pulse quicken beneath my fingertips, the fear and desperation in his eyes. He was just a pawn, a mindless follower of the guard's tyranny, but in that moment, he was my enemy, my target for all the pain and suffering they had caused. With my other hand, I wrestled the Excalibur from his grasp, the cold metal pressing against my skin. I gazed into his eyes, seeing the fear and hopelessness fill them, and for a moment I hesitated. Was I really capable of taking another life? But then I remembered Matt's lifeless body, and the rage returned. I pressed the barrel of the gun against the side of his head, my finger tightening on the trigger. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling, but I only stared back, my gaze unwavering. Journal entry 18. My hand trembled as I gripped the cold metal of the trigger, the weight of the gun heavy in my hand. My finger twitched, ready to release the bullet that would change everything. But before I could fully squeeze, a sudden realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. I was not alone in that room. I turned my head and saw the pain and horror reflected in my mother's eyes. It hit me like a punch to the gut, the weight of my actions, the gravity of the situation. The moment froze, suspended in time, as I struggled to comprehend the enormity of what I was about to do. With a shaky hand, I released the guard I had been, holding at gunpoint, allowing him to fall to the ground. And then I let go of the Excalibur, the weapon that had been my only source of power and control in this twisted world. As I slowly approached my mother and the two guards restraining her, my heart pounded in my chest. They shouted at me to stop, their voices filled with fear and anger. They threatened to shoot me or harm my mother, but I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was the sound of my own, ragged breaths, and the pounding of my heart. But then, as I moved closer to my mother, a searing pain erupted in the left side of my head. It was like a fire burning through my brain, consuming me from the inside out. Instinctively, I dropped to one knee, my hand reaching up to touch the source of the agony. My fingers came away wet and warm, covered in thick, dark, red liquid. Blood, my blood. The pain was overwhelming, engulfing me in a sea of agony. It drowned out all other sounds except for the pounding of my heart. I lay there on the floor, helpless and vulnerable, as the guard continued to tear apart my existence. They showed no mercy, no remorse. And my mother suffered the most. They shot her legs from beneath her, attaching a noose around her neck. They hoisted her into the air, her body convulsing as she struggled for breath. I could see the cold steel of their Excaliburs prodding her, a constant reminder of their power over us. And in her final moments, with tears streaming down her face, my mother turned to me and mustered a small smile. I could read her lips as she mouthed the words, "I love you." But before I could even process what was happening, she was gone. Her departure was accompanied by a deafening silence, as if the world had stopped spinning in that moment. And I was left alone, broken and shattered, with nothing but the memories of her love and the weight of my actions bearing down on me. Journal entry 19. With shattered hopes and a shattered heart, I lay there on the floor, consumed by pain. I watched as the guard mercilessly ripped my life apart, taking away the last remnants of my family. Each blow felt like a betrayal, a knife, twisting in my gut. How could they, the protectors of our society, be the ones responsible for its downfall? The deafening emptiness echoed around me, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had enveloped our world. The shadows seemed to dance with malevolence, devouring every glimmer of hope that dared to linger in the corners of our shattered reality. My home, once a symbol of Safety had become a trap. The air felt thick with despair as the guards seized me, dragging me away from the lifeless bodies of my family. My limbs felt heavy, and every step away from my mother was a step into a void of uncertainty. But as much as I wanted to fight back, to resist their grasp, I couldn't bring myself to do it. My mind was clouded with conflicting emotions, anger at the guard, guilt for not being able to protect my family, and fear for what the future held. How could I, a mere teenager, stand up against a powerful force that had already taken everything from me? The realization of my helplessness clawed at the edges of my consciousness, and I wondered if this was the end of everything I had ever known and loved. I couldn't imagine a life without my family, without our home, but as the guard's grip tightened on me, I knew I had to make a choice, either fight back and risk my own life, or go along with them and face the consequences. A voice in my head screamed for me to resist, to fight until my last breath. But another voice, one that sounded eerily like my mother's, begged me to stay alive, to do whatever it takes to survive. And in that moment, I made a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my days. I gave in to the guard, allowed them to take me away, and in doing so, I betrayed everything I stood for. As we left my destroyed home behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of regret wash over me. I had failed to protect my family, I had failed to stand up for what was right, and now I was being forced to join the very people who had caused all this. Destruction. But as the mocking laughter of the guard echoed in my ears, I knew there was no turning back. My fate was sealed, and I had no one to blame but myself. Journal entry 20. The moment their hands clasped around my wrists, the cold metal of their restraints sent a shiver down my spine. The sharp bite of the cuffs digging into my skin was a dark and bleak reminder of the power they held over me. Yet, even as they tightened their grip, I couldn't shake off the surreal detachment I felt from my own body. The throbbing pain in my head matched the erratic beat of my shattered heart, a constant reminder of the agony I was enduring. And the metallic tang of blood hung heavy in the air, a sickening reminder of the violence that had been inflicted upon us. As I looked up at the looming figures of the guard, their shadows seemed stretched like monstrous tendrils, engulfing me in their darkness. Their eyes glinted with sadistic pleasure, reveling in the destruction they had caused. And the buildings that still stood, mere witnesses to the atrocities that had unfolded, felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me with their silent accusations. Everything around me blurred into a nightmare, a twisted reality that I couldn't escape from. I questioned whether I was still tethered to my sanity, or if I had been completely consumed by this hellish world. But the worst part was not the physical pain or the mental turmoil. It was the knowledge that I had failed to protect my family, that I had let them down in the face of this merciless enemy. And as the guard's triumphant laughter echoed in the chamber of my mind, drowning out any last traces of hope, I couldn't help but wonder, why did they do what they did? What motivated them to inflict such cruelty upon innocent lives? The question echoed through the recesses of my mind, a haunting refrain that accompanied me into the shadows of an uncertain fate. And with every step they took, leading me away from the remnants of my shattered life, I knew that I was being dragged into a future that held nothing but pain and despair. But I refused to go down without a fight. I refused to let them break me, to let them take away my humanity. And even as I was dragged away, I vowed to keep holding onto the last shreds of my identity, to never let them win. Journal entry 21. The night had fallen, enveloping the wreckage of my home in darkness. The remnants of my once happy and warm life surrounded me, a stark contrast to the cold floor on which I lay. Memories of my mother's final words echoed in the air. I was alone and broken. Time blurred as the guard, indifferent to the pain they had caused, seized me with a brutal force. They were the same guards who had torn apart my family, now turned into my captors. Their weapons, Excaliburs, were at the ready to enforce submission. I was bound and helpless, led through the ruins of my village. I was a silent witness to the devastation they had brought upon us. The journey to the prisoner camp was a torment of its own. The night air carried the mournful whispers of the desert, as if grieving the loss of our innocence. Along with other captives from the village, I was herded into the back of a dark and ominous vehicle. It was a modified transport truck used by the guard to transport their prisoners to the desolate prison camps. The metallic clang of the doors closing behind me marked the beginning of a journey into darkness. The confined space was dimly lit by a flickering bulb, revealing the faces of those who shared my fate. Their eyes reflected the pain and despair that now resided within me. "You'll pay for this," I heard someone mutter under their breath. "Shut up," a guard barked, silencing any further protests. The truck rumbled on, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. The journey seemed endless, each passing mile a reminder of the life we had lost. But as we neared the prison camp, a sense of dread and terror filled the air. We were entering a place of no return, a place of endless suffering. And as the gates of the camp loomed ahead, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever see the light again. As I looked around, the faces of my siblings were nowhere to be seen. James, Ruth, Mary. My heart clenched in fear and desperation as I prayed for their safety. But then a thought crept into my mind, one that I immediately pushed away. What if they had been captured? What if they were suffering in this very same camp that I was being forced into? I shook my head, trying to rid myself of these doubts. My siblings were strong, they were survivors. They must have escaped, I told myself, trying to hold on to hope. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the nagging worry that maybe they hadn't been so lucky. As the convoy rumbled on, my inner turmoil grew. Should I try to escape or risk my life for a chance to find my siblings? But then what? Where would we go? How would we survive? The thought of abandoning my family, even for a slim chance of freedom, went against everything I believed in. But as we arrived at the prison camp, reality hit me like a cold, hard slap in the face. The guards' harsh commands and the sight of the barbed wire fences and watchtowers sent shivers down my spine. I was now a prisoner, a mere shadow of my former self, and the thought of never seeing my siblings again filled me with overwhelming grief. In the days that followed, I struggled with the inner conflict of wanting to survive and hold on to hope, while also feeling guilty for leaving my siblings behind. I wanted to make a plan, to fight back, but the constant fear and exhaustion wore me down. And when faced with the choice of betraying my fellow prisoners or risking punishment, I made a decision that I knew I would regret for the rest of my life. Journal entry 22. Ahead of us loomed the processing area, a cold and sterile space where our fate would be decided. The guards, armed with deadly Excaliburs and clad in dark uniforms, barked orders with a cruel detachment. We were subjected to a dehumanizing inspection, stripped down in the frigid night. They treated us like objects, not human beings. The guards searched for any signs of resistance or defiance, ready to stamp out any hint of rebellion. After the humiliating processing was over, we were separated from each other. I was taken in for interrogation, where they prodded me about my beliefs, my past, and my connections to the forbidden faith, but their questions seemed to hold little meaning, except for the ones about who I knew. I remained silent only, revealing that they had killed everyone I held dear. It was clear that their goal was not to understand, but to control. That's why they resorted to beating me with their fists and clubs. Finally, the interrogation ended and I was given a uniform and a number to replace my name. The rough fabric clung to my skin, a constant reminder of my lost identity. It felt like they had taken burlap, sacks, and cut holes in them for our arms and heads to fit through. The material barely covered us and provided little warmth. The guards, devoid of empathy, continued their relentless efforts to break my spirit. But through it all, I held on to the hope that one day, somehow, I would be reunited with my siblings and we would escape this hell together. And until that day came, I would have to live with the inner turmoil of knowing that I had failed to save them. As I stood at the entrance of the prison camp, the grim reality of my situation hit me hard. The barren landscape, dotted with rows of tents and guarded by barbed wire, was a haunting sight. My eyes scanned the area, taking in the bleakness of my surroundings. I could feel the weight of despair pressing down on me, threatening to crush my spirit. But something stirred within me as I observed the watchful eyes of the guards. It was a newfound resolve, a fierce determination that ignited within me. I knew that I had to endure, to resist, and to find a way back to the light no matter the odds. And with this determination burning within me, I stepped into the prison camp, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I embarked on this journey into the shadows, I could feel the flame inside me growing stronger. Once flickering, now it burned with an unyielding intensity. The struggle within the confines of the prison camp was just beginning, and I was determined to overcome it. Every step I took, every breath I took, was a testament to my unwavering determination. The setting of the prison camp was a desolate one, a place filled with hopelessness and despair. But through my actions, I showed that I refused to succumb to the darkness. I was determined to find my way back to the light, no matter how difficult the path may be. As I navigated through the prison camp, I encountered other prisoners who were also fighting to survive. Through the words they spoke and actions they took, I could see the strength and resilience of their hearts. We were all in this together, united in our determination to overcome the obstacles before us. I took in every detail of the prison camp, the rows of tents, the barbed wire, the watchful eyes of the guards. Each one held a deeper meaning, reflecting the harsh reality of our situation. But I refused to let these details overwhelm me. Instead, I used them to fuel my determination and keep pushing forward. In the face of adversity, my actions spoke louder than words. Through my unwavering determination and resilience, I showed that I was not just a prisoner in this desolate landscape, but a fighter. And as I continued on my journey, I knew that I would emerge from the shadows stronger and more determined than ever before. Journal entry 23. The prison camp was a bleak and oppressive place where each day blended into the next in a monotonous haze. The constant torment and hardship seemed never-ending, but in the midst of this grim existence, a glimmer of hope appeared. One restless night, I lay awake on my cold bunk, the weight of my confinement heavy on my shoulders. Suddenly, a familiar laughter echoed in the air, soft and comforting. My heart leaped with excitement as I turned to the source, only to see a fleeting figure dancing on the edge of my vision. In the dim light, the silhouette of a cowboy hat bobbed up and down, and a childlike voice called out my name. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was my little brother, Matt, forever etched in my memory. Was this real or just my mind playing tricks? On me? Or perhaps it was a memory coming to life before my eyes. Driven by an otherworldly impulse, I followed the apparition through the deserted corridors of the camp, carefully avoiding being seen or heard. The ghostly image of Matt led me, a soothing presence in the midst of the harsh reality of prison life. Through the shadows and silence, I felt a connection to a realm beyond the desolation of my surroundings. Each step I took was filled with purpose, my senses heightened as I absorbed every detail of my surroundings. The cold ground underneath my feet, the musty smell of the dimly lit corridors, the faint, soft sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty valley of the camp. And then I heard it, a faint voice calling out my name. "John," it whispered, and I knew it was Matt. My heart overflowed with emotion as I followed the sound, my feet moving of their own accord. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was being guided by something greater than myself. Finally, I reached the source of the voice. Standing in the moonlight was my brother. His face was filled with a peaceful light, and his voice was filled with love and hope. "John," he said again, and I knew that he was not just a memory or a figment of my imagination. He was here in this moment, giving me strength and reminding me that there was still hope in this desolate place. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace and connection that I had never experienced before. And even though I knew that Matt was no longer alive, his presence was a reminder that he would always be with me no matter where I was. Journal entry 24. As I walked through the camp, a ghostly presence guided me to a hidden corner where a small cluster of tents stood. As I approached, the spectral figure disappeared, leaving me in the company of familiar faces. James, Ruth, and Mary stood before me, their eyes reflecting both surprise and relief. No words were needed to convey the shared struggle we had endured. In the shelter of this hidden enclave, we found solace in each other's presence. We exchanged stories of our captures, the guards' knowledge of Ruth and Mary being sisters, and they told that James was just a mere neighbor. I sadly shared the news of our mother's fate and that of Matt. Our reunion was bittersweet, tinged with the harsh reality of our captivity, yet the bond of kinship was unbreakable, transcending the harsh conditions we were subjected to. In the quiet moments, we conveyed unspoken understanding and found comfort in knowing we were not alone in the darkness. To the watchful eyes of the guard, I was just another numbered prisoner, a lost soul swallowed by the shadows. My siblings, united in spirit, maintained the facade of strangers in relation to me under the relentless scrutiny. Survival demanded caution, and our cherished moments as a family were hidden beneath the oppressive veil of the camp's routines. As the days passed, our actions spoke louder than words. We showed our love for each other through small gestures and shared glances. The setting may have been bleak, but in each other's company, we found a glimmer of hope. Our conversations were brief and guarded, but they revealed the strength of our bond. Through it all, we remained a family, unbreakable and unwavering in the face of adversity. Journal entry 25. As the days unfolded, a persistent shadow loomed over our newfound connection. The whispers of the guard hinted at an imminent interrogation, a brutal ritual that awaited those deemed a threat to the order they sought to enforce. The smell of fear hung heavy in the air as we were led into the interrogation chamber once more, the sharp metallic tang of blood mixed with the musty scent of sweat, creating a sickening symphony that assaulted our senses. My heart raced with a mix of anxiety and defiance, knowing what was to come. The guards, faces concealed behind cold masks, were like puppets controlled by the higher powers. Their actions were calculated and precise, their voices devoid of any emotion as they pressed for information with relentless cruelty. In the dim confines of that unforgiving room, our resilience was put to the test once again. The brutal beatings and verbal onslaught sought to break both body and spirit. But amidst the pain and chaos, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of fascination for these enigmatic figures. Who were they? What drove them to carry out such heinous acts? The questions only fueled my determination to resist. As the interrogation dragged on, I couldn't help but wonder about the stories behind each of the guards' masks. Were they forced into this role? Did they have families waiting for them at home? But such thoughts were quickly snuffed out as their blows landed with bone-crunching force, each one meant to extinguish the flame of resistance. But within the battered confines of my heart, a stubborn ember endured. It was fueled by a mixture of anger, defiance, and a deep sense of purpose. No matter how many blows rained down on me, no matter how many times they tried to break me, I refused to give in. As the interrogators tired of their merciless pursuit, I was left bruised and broken. They may have left me with a few broken bones, but they also left me with a heart that burned for defiance. The pain etched into my body was eclipsed by the indomitable flame that continued to burn within. The scars of the interrogation became a testament to the strength that had survived the shadows, a strength that would become the beacon guiding me through the uncharted darkness that lay ahead. Journal entry 26. In the midst of the forbidden tents, my siblings and I secretly gathered, seeking solace from the oppressive prison camp. As we huddled in the shadows, the weight of our shared pain and torment hung thick in the air, suffocating us. Though physically intact, James, Ruth, and Mary bore invisible scars, the result of relentless interrogations that had shredded the fabric of their spirits. As I settled into the hushed stillness of their presence, I couldn't help but notice the signs of their suffering. The lines etched on James's face, the haunted gaze in Ruth's eyes, and the withdrawn expression on Mary's face all spoke volumes, revealing the depths of their agony. Our reunion, meant to bring comfort, instead became a mark of the shadows that had consumed our souls. The setting of our secret gathering, hidden away from the prying eyes of our captors, added to the gravity of the situation. The tension in the air was palpable, with every sound amplified and every movement magnified. But it was the unspoken dialogue between us that spoke the loudest, as we shared our pain without uttering a word. The details of our suffering were etched into our very beings, with every sense heightened to the extreme. The stench of fear and desperation, the taste of hopelessness, the sound of shattered spirits, and the sight of broken souls. All of it encompassed in that small, hidden tent. Despite the overwhelming weight of our circumstances, we clung to each other, finding strength and solace in our shared bond. In the end, it was these small moments of connection, these stolen glimpses of humanity, that kept us going. And as we sat in that hidden tent, surrounded by shadows and scars, we knew that we would endure together, no matter what trials came our way. Journal entry 27. James, the stalwart protector of the family, bore the visible weight of guilt and responsibility like a heavy cloak draped over his broad shoulders. The lines etched on his forehead told a tale of sleepless nights, haunted by the echoes of a father lost in the burden of keeping his siblings safe. The creases seemed to deepen with each passing day, a physical manifestation of the invisible weight he carried. His once piercing gaze, a pillar of strength for his family, now held a vulnerability that mirrored the fractures within. The fierce determination that once burned in his eyes had been replaced by a flicker of doubt and fear. As he looked upon his siblings, his heart ached with the weight of their futures resting on his shoulders. James was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had always been the one to step up, to take charge and protect his family. But as the days passed, the weight of his responsibility seemed to grow heavier, threatening to crush him under its weight. The sound of his siblings' laughter used to bring him joy, but now it only served as a reminder of the innocence they had lost. Every time he looked at them, his heart swelled with love and pride, but also with a deep sense of sorrow for the childhood they were robbed of. As he sat alone in the quiet of the night, he could feel the weight of his father's absence like a physical ache in his chest. He had promised to protect his family, but he couldn't protect them from the pain of losing their father. And now he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was failing them in some way. James was a man who had always been strong, physically and emotionally. But the events of the past had chipped away at that strength, leaving behind a man who was both resilient and fragile. A man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, but found solace in the laughter and love of his siblings. Journal entry 28. Ruth sat silently beside him, her eyes reflecting the heavy weight of emotional exhaustion. The endless interrogations had relentlessly targeted the deep-seated bond between siblings, ruthlessly exploiting Ruth's unwavering love for her family. As a result, her once vibrant spirit now seemed tamed, as if the relentless darkness had dimmed the flame that once burned so fiercely within her. The air was thick with the pungent smell of fear, and the taste of bitter betrayal lingered on their tongues. Ruth's heart was heavy with the burden of guilt and the suffocating grip of desperation. Her trembling hands clenched tightly in her lap, as if trying to hold on to the shreds of her shattered composure. But it was her voice that revealed the true depth of her turmoil. It quivered with every word, struggling to contain the overwhelming emotions bubbling within. Her usually cheerful tone now tainted with a hint of despair, a hint of defeat. As the interrogations continued, the tension in the room grew thicker, suffocating the very air they breathed. Ruth's once bright and lively eyes now seemed haunted by the ghosts of their past, and the weight of her emotions threatened to consume her entirely. In that moment, it was clear that this was not just a battle of words, but a war of emotions. And Ruth was the ultimate casualty, her character forever marked by the scars of this psychological assault. Journal entry 29. Mary, the youngest and until recently the most innocent, sat apart, her gaze fixed on a distant point. The room was filled with the scent of her tears, and the sound of her fragile voice echoed off the walls. She spoke of her interrogations, her words a haunting melody that evoked a sense of vulnerability and fear. As she recounted her experiences, her once radiant eyes were now clouded with pain, shame, and a desperate plea for understanding. But it wasn't just her words that conveyed the depth of her suffering. It was the way she held herself, her body tense and trembling, as if reliving the trauma in every moment. It was the way her hands shook, the way her breath caught in her throat, the way her entire being seemed to be consumed by the weight of her story. And as she spoke, the room was filled with a palpable sense of emotion, as if her words were a living, breathing entity that could not be ignored. Her story was unspeakable, a violation that had robbed her of more than just her physical integrity, but through her trembling voice and tear-filled eyes, she found the strength to share it with us, to make us understand the depth of her suffering and the resilience of her spirit. In that moment, Mary's heart became more than just a victim. She became a symbol of strength and courage, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable pain, the human spirit can endure. And as she finished her story, her eyes held a glimmer of hope, a sense of determination to rise above the darkness and reclaim her innocence. The revelation of Mary's unspeakable violation lingered in the air like an unspoken truth, casting a shadow over all of us. Her whispers carried the weight of a pain that transcended the physical, and the vulnerability etched into her features spoke of a soul grappling with profound trauma. The room, already laden with the weight of shared sorrow, became a chamber of emotions too raw to bear. James stormed out of the tent. His rage heated the atmosphere. I didn't know what to do. Should I go and follow James? Where did he go? What was he planning to do? I looked over the room at my sisters. Ruth was brought to tears. She went to Mary's side and wrapped her arms around Mary, doing all she could from completely breaking into pieces before us. She whispered to Mary, and Mary nodded in response. She attempted to give Ruth a smile. But through the pain and shock of her story, an honest smile was not to be found. Still to this day, I don't know what was said. That was a moment for them. The revelation tore at the very fabric of my being, igniting a tempest of conflicting emotions. As the weight of the truth settled on my shoulders, I felt a tug of war raging within me. On one side, there was the voice of my faith, urging me to forgive and show compassion. On the other, a primal desire for violent retribution, fueled by the flames of anger and vengeance. The darkness within me sought to consume my faithful values, tempting me with the allure of unleashing my rage upon the perpetrator. Contemplation became a battleground within my soul, a struggle between the teachings of the Bible, the call for forgiveness, and the visceral rage that sought an eye for an eye. The moral compass of my faith faced the relentless assault of a vengeful storm, threatening to shatter the delicate balance between righteousness and the alluring path of retribution. But as I grappled with this internal conflict, I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt and shame creeping in. Was I not supposed to be a beacon of love and forgiveness, even in the face of such heinous acts? The thought of succumbing to vengeance went against everything I believed in, yet the desire for justice burned within me like a raging fire. As the weight of my decision bore down on me, I couldn't help but feel that I was failing both myself and my faith. My mind was torn between doing what was right and giving in to the temptation of revenge. And as much as I tried to push it away, the thought of taking matters into my own hands lingered in the back of my mind like a dark shadow. But in the midst of this turmoil, I couldn't ignore the pleading looks of my siblings, searching for guidance and reassurance. They had turned to me, their steady sibling, their rock in times of crisis. The weight of leadership rested heavily on my shoulders, as the decision to succumb to vengeance or uphold the teachings of love and forgiveness loomed over our family. In that moment, I realized that my inner conflict was not just about my own beliefs and morals, but also about the impact it would have on my loved ones. As I grappled with this realization, I knew that whatever choice I made, it would have consequences that I would have to live with for the rest of my life. A choice for not just my soul, but the souls of my family. Journal entry 31. As the room shook with the weight of unspoken turmoil, the Bible, once a sturdy anchor, now felt like a fragile relic in the face of such profound suffering. Its pages, worn and weathered, held verses that echoed in my mind like a haunting melody, words of compassion, turning the other cheek, and letting go of the burden of revenge. But as I looked around at my siblings, their eyes reflecting the shared pain we had endured, I couldn't help but feel a surge of unholy anger, a tempest that threatened to drown out the whispers of faith. The verses that had once guided me now became both a source of solace and an unbearable burden. They spoke of forgiveness and mercy, but could I truly find it in my heart to forgive those who had caused us so much pain? The choice between darkness and light, vengeance and forgiveness, hung in the air like a heavy fog, waiting for me to make a decision. In the hidden tents, once a sanctuary, now a crucible of internal strife, my siblings and I were faced with a difficult decision. We were no longer the innocent children we once were, but instead had become shaped by the harsh realities of this prison camp. As we stood there, our futures hanging in the balance, I couldn't help but wonder if we would ever be able to find peace within this relentless grasp. But as I looked into the eyes of my siblings, I knew that we were in this together. And together, we could overcome any obstacle, even the toughest of choices. I broke the eerie and darkening silence, my voice broken and weak. Mary, could you come on a walk with me? I knew James and Ruth had their own struggles within them at that time. I wanted to comfort Mary the best I could and let her know that she was not alone in this horrific moment of her young and precious life. As we wandered through the hushed pathways of the camp, under the cloak of night, I sensed Mary's palpable tension, her troubled demeanor casting a somber shadow over our walk. Moonlight filtered through the canopy of clouds, lending an eerie luminescence to our surroundings as we treaded softly, enveloped in a cocoon of secrecy. Mary, my voice was gentle but broken, trying to hold back my anger and sorrow amidst the eerie stillness. I can see you're hurting. If you're ready to share, I'm here to listen. You don't have to carry this burden alone. Mary cast a fleeting glance, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes as she summoned the courage to confide in me the horrors that she endured. With each halting whisper, she unraveled the chilling tale of her interrogation, torture, and betrayal. Her voice trembled with the weight of her words. It was David, the young blue-eyed guard. The one who started a couple of weeks ago, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. He said he was sorry that he had no choice. His superiors, they forced him to do it. He seemed so much nicer than the other guards. But as he took my innocence, I looked into his tear-filled eyes. I never thought he could be capable of such darkness. My heart ached in pain, as though the emotional toll was physically tearing it apart. A surge of sympathy coursed through me as I grappled with the enormity of her anguish. I reached out, a silent gesture of solidarity, offering her the sanctuary of her brother's arms as she navigated the treacherous depths of her trauma. As Mary confided in me her terrors, I listened with full attention, my heart heavy with sorrow and indignation. I marveled at her resilience, her unwavering spirit shining through the darkness that threatened to engulf her. She told me that she wanted to find more information about the blue-eyed guard. She told me of how she felt like he was just as broken as we all were now. She wanted to know if there was good within him. Shocked at this mature response from my younger sister, I told her that I didn't think it was a good idea for us to find information regarding any of the guard. I also told her that a man who does the things that happened to her has no goodness within. The look in her eyes as I said this to her, like I had defrauded her of her image of me, like the veil of my flesh was lifted, and she saw the enemy within me. Mary slapped me across my cheek. She was never one for outbursts or physical retaliation. "Sorry," she whispered into the air as I turned my gaze back to Mary. She was frozen in horror at what she had done, tears falling down her face. I grabbed her by the arms and pulled her into my arms again. Holding her head close to my chest, I could hear her muffled sobbing. I whispered back, "It's okay, Mary. You are right." We slowly made our way back to the hidden tents, talking about what we needed to do going forward. I told her to keep our conversation quiet from James and Ruth. I figured how they would respond, and I couldn't let them pull Mary into their darkness. In the embrace of the night, we forged a bond and shared pain and solidarity, our footsteps echoing in harmony as we traversed the labyrinth of emotions that enveloped us. As we emerged from the shadows, I vowed to stand by Mary's side, a steadfast ally in her quest for justice, redemption, and healing. Journal entry 32. A few days had passed since the night of our unbearable truths. I watched my brother James from across the room. A pulse of empathy overcame me and tugged at my heart. He sat with a furrowed brow, his hands tightly gripping his coffee mug, lost in thought. James seemed distant, his eyes betraying the inner turmoil he wrestled with. I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt wash over me. James had always been there for me, the one who never hesitated to offer his support and guidance. And yet, here I was, unable to help him in his time of need. Summoning my courage, I approached James, determined to offer him comfort in the only way I knew how, through Scripture. "James," I began gently, "I can see you're struggling, but remember, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." James's reaction was not what I expected. His brows furrowed deeper, and a flash of anger sparked in his eyes. "Don't quote Scripture at me, John," he retorted sharply. "Do you honestly believe that some ancient words written in a book can solve our problems? Do you think that somehow it can solve Father's death? That it can bring back Matt and Mother from beyond the grave? Not that they have one, left out to rot like garbage. Or is it that somehow a stupid old book of false hope can make it so Mary was never raped?" Taken aback by his response, I felt a weight of disappointment and a burden of sorrow. My attempt to offer solace had only seemed to incite further frustration in my brother. I never knew the depth of James's despair. Lost in the depths of Hades, to be brought to the point of rejecting everything we had been brought up with. But I couldn't give up. "James, I know it may not seem like it now, but God's word offers wisdom and guidance in times of uncertainty," I persisted, trying to keep my voice steady and being confident in my conviction of what I believe in, despite the tension between us. Even when we can't see the way forward, we can find strength in knowing that God is with us, guiding us through the darkness. We promise to continue in Father's legacy. That includes living our lives in the way He taught us to live them. But James remained unconvinced, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "Don't you dare bring Father up at a time like this. Father would have never let Matt or Mother die. He never would have let us be captured. He wouldn't have failed in a time of need. Not like we did. Stop pretending to be so smart and wise. Also, I don't need your platitudes, John. Just shut up, keep to yourself, and don't die." He snapped, pushing himself up from the ground and storming away, leaving me standing there, my heart heavy with the weight of his rejection. As I watched him go, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. I had hoped that my words would have offered comfort to my brother, but instead they had only served to deepen the rift between us. I felt us on two opposite sides of a chasm, and the earth between us getting further apart from each other. I felt like for every step forward I tried to take, instead I stepped backwards. As I stood there alone, I couldn't help but wonder if there was anything I could do to bridge the divide, to help James find his way through the darkness that threatened to consume him. Journal entry 33. Some time had passed since my failed attempt to be there for my brother. We hardly talked at this point, but we were both there for our sisters. Eventually, Ruth and I found ourselves alone, a rare moment of quiet amidst the chaos of life. I saw an opportunity to connect with her on a deeper level. I gently touched her hand, silently encouraging her to open up and share her struggles. I wanted her to know that I was there for her no matter what. As she began to speak, I listened with all my heart. I could feel the weight of her pain, the depth of her sorrow reverberating within me. I could tell she had been having a difficult time, whether it was for herself or for our siblings. I didn't know at that time, but eventually I learned the feeling my sister Ruth was going through. She trembled as she spoke, her confusion evident in her voice. "John, I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes, usually filled with a vibrant spirit, now held a haunting emptiness. How can a loving God allow such terrible things to happen? Innocent people suffering, children in pain. It's unbearable. Her words were a raw, painful expression of the doubt that had been gnawing at her. I felt a pang of empathy, recognizing the depth of her despair. I'd seen this storm brewing in her eyes for weeks, and now it had finally erupted. "Ruth, I know this is incredibly difficult," I began gently, my voice a soft counterpoint to her anguish. "I wish I could shield you from this pain, but I can't. What I can do is be here for you, to listen, to share the burden as best I can." She looked at me, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "It's like walking through a dark tunnel," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "I can't see the end, and I'm terrified of getting lost." "The dark tunnel can be a lonely place, Ruth," I agreed, squeezing her hand tighter. "But remember, you're not alone. You have James, Mary, and me. We're all with you. Most importantly, God is with you. And even in the darkest of times, there's always a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light. Maybe that light isn't about finding immediate answers, but about discovering the strength and resilience you possess." I paused, considering my next words carefully. "You know that the Bible speaks of God, who is both loving and just. It's a difficult concept to grasp when faced with such suffering, but it's a truth that has sustained many through their darkest hours. God sees our pain, He feels our sorrow, and He promises to be with us every step of the way." Ruth's eyes, filled with unshed tears, met mine. "I want to believe that," she said softly. "But it's hard to hold on to hope when everything around me seems so broken. It's not fair. We've lost so much and have had to endure so much. Faith is a journey, not a destination," I replied, "and it's often tested in the fires of adversity. But remember, even in the midst of our struggles, God offers us His grace, His mercy, and His unending love. That's the foundation on which we can build our hope." As we sat together in the quiet stillness, I could see a glimmer of hope in Ruth's eyes. In our shared vulnerability, we found solace and strength, drawing comfort from each other's presence. And as we emerged from our heart-to-heart conversation, I knew that Ruth's journey of faith was far from over, but I also knew that she was not alone. I promised to walk beside her every step of the way, offering my unwavering support and unconditional love, no matter what trials may come our way. In the embrace of our shared humanity, we found the courage to face even the darkest of days, knowing that together we were stronger than any adversity we might face. Journal entry 34. Several weeks had passed since Mary's harrowing revelation, a chasm of time. That seemed to stretch into an eternity. In those long and drawn-out days, Mary and I had become meticulous observers, our lives consumed by the rhythmic patterns of the guards. We were detectives in a world gone mad, piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces. We had found allies in this investigation. They were as varied as the guards themselves. Henry Jackman, a man of Norse faith and keen intellect, was a font of unexpected knowledge. His understanding of patterns and cycles, honed by his spiritual beliefs, proved invaluable. He saw the world as a complex interplay of forces, a cosmic dance where even the most mundane routines held hidden significance. It was Henry who first noticed there were a total of 5 corps, groups of guards. With a patience born of centuries-old wisdom, he meticulously recorded these observations, creating a framework upon which we could build our understanding. Along with these 5 core groups, there were also another 3 groups that rotated their shifts in a different way from the core 5. Jeremiah Davidson, a Jewish elder with the wisdom honed by years, offered a different perspective. Rooted in the traditions of his faith, he brought a moral compass to our investigation. His interpretation of the guards' behavior was colored by his belief in the inherent goodness of humanity, a perspective that often clashed with the grim reality we faced. Yet, Jeremiah's faith was a source of resilience, a steady anchor in the turbulent sea of uncertainty. He had witnessed guard captains flipping a brass coin, and the losing captain was to be on shift. Jeremiah had studied these coin flips a multitude of times. He talked about how these coins were called challenge coins. The coins were given to the captains from the president of the guard, as a sign of rank, title, and power. The captains were now using these coins to determine which group of guards were to be on duty. Jeremiah also explained that he saw the coin tosses not merely as a bureaucratic ritual, but as a reflection of the human condition, a constant gamble between order and chaos. His insights into the psychology of power were as sharp as his intellect, and his unwavering belief in justice fueled our determination to uncover the truth. Samantha Takahashi, a quiet woman with an uncanny ability to observe, had stumbled upon a crucial piece of the puzzle. While gathering water from the communal well, she'd overheard a group of guards discussing their latest assignment. Their words, spoken in hushed tones, had carried on the wind to her attentive ears. One guard, his voice laced with a mixture of bravado and contempt, had referred to another as David. The name had registered in Samantha's mind a fleeting echo in the cacophony of the camp. It was a chance encounter, a moment of serendipity amidst the bleakness. Yet Samantha's sharp mind had recognized the significance of that overheard conversation. She had noted the tone of animosity in the guard's voice, a hint of something sinister lurking beneath the surface. The name David had become a focal point, a piece of a larger, more terrifying picture. When we had started reaching out for help in our little recon project, Samantha's recollection surfaced like a ghost from the past. The pieces began to fit together with a chilling inevitability. The name David, once a mere whisper, had transformed into a tangible clue, the name of the one who violated my little sister. Yet Mary clung to a desperate hypothesis. David was a victim, a pawn in a sinister game orchestrated by his peers. Her empathy, a profound wellspring of compassion, was both her strength and her undoing. It was a dangerous line of reasoning, a seductive illusion that offered solace but obscured the brutal reality. This was not a playground dispute, a childish prank escalated out of control. It was a deliberate act of violence, a violation of the most fundamental human rights. The weight of this truth pressed down upon me, a heavy burden that challenged my own understanding of humanity. How could such darkness exist in the hearts of men? And what drove them to commit such atrocities in the name of power or some twisted sense of camaraderie? Journal entry 35. It was like there was a rift within our family, not just drifting us further apart, but forcing us away like a tidal wave. James and Ruth had been spending more time together, their absence at our family meals casting a long, ominous shadow. I had tried to talk with James about how he had been feeling about his faith. Most of the time, I got dismissively pushed to the side as he would. Either continue working or escape from my worrying. Other times, his responses were like daggers. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, the dam broke. I had dared to bring up the subject once more, my voice gentle in an attempt to reach him. "James," I began, my heart pounding in my chest, "I know you're hurting, and I want to understand what you're going through." His response was a tidal wave of fury. "Don't you get it, John? There is no God. You think for a second that an all-powerful, all-loving, and just God would let his people live out these atrocities? When are you going to grow up?" His voice, once a comforting baritone, was now a raw, wounded howl. Shocked by his volatile response, I tried to find the right words. "James, don't you remember the book of Job?" James scoffed. "The book about the guy who lost everything and still praised God? Yeah, I read it. It's a joke." "A joke?" Taken back by his words, "How can you say that? Because it's unrealistic," James replied. "No one in their right mind would praise God after everything Job went through. It's like saying a Holocaust survivor should love Hitler. That's not fair. Job was a righteous man who trusted in God. I was trying to remain calm." "Righteous?" James laughed bitterly. "Righteous? What does that even mean? Is it righteous to let innocent people suffer? Is it righteous to watch children die of hunger, disease, or being shot down like Matt?" My anger swelled at the mention of Matt. "James, that's not fair. You can't blame God for everything." "Oh, really?" James said, his voice rising even more. "Who else can I blame? The devil? Santa Claus? The tooth fairy?" He paced back and forth, his fists clenched. "I'm sick of this. I'm sick of pretending that everything is okay. I'm sick of being told to have faith when there's nothing to have faith in." James stormed out of the tent, the fury buried within him, and started to burn away who he was raised to be. Journal entry 36. Ruth, who had been sitting quietly across from us, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sorrow, witnessed the entire exchange. Her face was a mask of pain as she watched the man she was beginning to care for unravel before her eyes. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing. I had never seen such raw, unbridled anger in my brother before. It was as if a stranger had possessed him, their venom dripping from every word. In that moment, I saw the depths of his despair, the chasm of pain he was drowning in. The weight of his words was crushing. It was as if he had torn open a wound in my heart that I didn't know existed. I had always believed in the power of our shared faith, in its ability to heal and to bind us together. But now, my brother, consumed by darkness, I questioned everything. How could I have been so blind to his suffering? How could I have failed to be there for him when he needed me most? Ruth, meanwhile, was grappling with her own storm. The once steady ground of her faith was now shifting beneath her feet. The raw, unfiltered pain she had witnessed in James mirrored the doubts that had been creeping into her own heart. The world they were living in, a world of suffering and injustice, seemed to mock the promises of a benevolent God. And as she watched the man she was growing close to, a man who had once shared her beliefs, reject everything they had held dear, she found herself questioning the very foundation of her own faith. She found herself drawn to Psalms, those ancient words of lament and longing. In them, she discovered a reflection of her own turmoil, a recognition that doubt and despair were not foreign to the human experience. But even in the depths of their sorrow, the psalmist found a way to cling to hope, to trust in a God who was beyond understanding. Perhaps, she thought, faith was not about certainty, but about courage, about clinging to hope in the face of darkness. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness, the echo of James's words haunted me. Sleep was a distant memory. Instead, I was consumed by a deep sorrow, a profound sense of loss. The brother I had known, the one who shared my laughter and dreams, seemed to have vanished, replaced by a shadow of his former self. In that darkness, I realized that the rift between us was far deeper than I had ever imagined. As Ruth sat alone in the quiet of the night, she wrestled with these conflicting emotions. Doubt, like an insidious vine, began to encroach upon the garden of her belief. The comforting narratives she had clung to, the promises of eternal salvation and divine providence, now seemed like distant echoes. The image of a loving God, a shepherd guiding his flock through troubled waters, was fading, replaced by a cold, indifferent universe. Yet a part of her resisted this descent into despair. The future seemed shrouded in uncertainty, a path illuminated only by flickering glimpses of hope. But in the midst of her turmoil, doubt crept in like a tendril, winding its way through the cracks in her faith. She tried to resist, to cling to the familiar beliefs that had anchored her, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. She questioned everything, from the existence of God to the meaning of her own life. Her faith, once a steadfast lighthouse, now flickered and faltered in the storm of doubt. She had always been a woman of unwavering faith. She had turned to her religion in times of joy and sorrow, finding peace and strength in its teachings. But now, as she faced this crisis of belief, she felt adrift and alone. She sought answers in the scriptures, in the words of the prophets, in the letters from Paul, in the red letters, but they seemed to offer little comfort. The doubt gnawed at her, a constant companion that refused to be ignored. She tried to rationalize her feelings, to convince herself that her faith was still intact, but the doubt was too persistent. She felt like she was losing her grip on reality, that the world was unraveling around her. As the doubt continued to grow, she began to question the very foundations of her existence. She wondered if there was any meaning to life beyond the mundane routines of everyday existence. She felt a sense of emptiness, a void that nothing could fill. Journal entry 37. The aftermath of my argument with James left me adrift in an abyssal void of loneliness, a solitary ship tossed about in a sea of despair, constantly struggling to find a resolution or even just words to approach James with. Ruth, once a steadfast anchor, had retreated into her own silent storm, her light extinguished by the encroaching darkness. Witnessing my eldest sibling succumb to the suffocating hopelessness was like watching the life drain from their eyes, a wound that refused to heal, a gaping chasm in the fabric of my soul. The guards' relentless demands for increased labor, longer hours, and unquestioning obedience were like a tightening noose around our necks, each day a struggle against despair, a battle for survival in a world that seemed intent on crushing our spirits. Mary, always the innocent, sensitive soul, had begun to express a growing unease, a subtle tremor beneath her usually calm demeanor. She confided in me that she felt watched, followed, a phantom presence lurking in the shadows, casting long, ominous tendrils of fear that chilled her to the bone. The sensation was more than just a fleeting paranoia. It was a constant weight upon her heart, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind that refused to be silenced. The more she spoke, the more I realized that her uneasiness was not merely a product of her heightened anxiety. There were subtle clues, fleeting glimpses, that hinted at a darker truth. I remembered the way a guard had lingered too long near our cell, his eyes ever staring at us, watching, almost studying us. I recalled the hushed conversations between guards that had seemed oddly conspiratorial, as if they were plotting against us. As soon as we would pay attention, they ceased to communicate with each other and instead commanded us to continue our labors. It was clear that Mary's intuition was sharper than most. She was sensing something that the rest of us were too blind to see. I made it a priority to ensure she was never alone, assigning a fellow faithful to accompany her at all times, a silent guardian against the unseen threat that seemed to stalk her every step. But even with this added protection, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted even after our capture, prey caught and now in. Captivity being hunted. It was a sinister force that was closing in on us, and Mary was the only one who could see it coming. It was shortly there, after this time of heightened anxiety, that the guards' cruelty reached a new, horrifying apex. Faithful were being systematically eliminated, their lives snuffed out at the same rate as new arrivals. Dr. Drews, a fellow Christian and a skilled physician, approached Mary and me with a grim assessment. He suggested that either the camp had reached its maximum capacity or that the guard supplies were dwindling. Regardless, our future within these oppressive walls looked more bleak than ever. In the face of such despair, a small group of us faithful began to meet in secret, conversations, hushed whispers of hope and defiance. Our gatherings were brief, stolen moments of respite from the relentless surveillance, punishment, and terror. Communication, a delicate dance of trust and secrecy, required a new language, a series of shorthand symbols and coded notes that allowed us to exchange vital information without raising suspicion, at least for the most part. James and Ruth approached me while I was out in the quarry, hammering away at stones to be placed and cemented to the walls of our prison camp. They both seemed like lifeless husks of their former selves, but I could tell in their voices they were worried. Journal entry 38. It had been weeks since I last spoke to James or Ruth. Both of them had set out on their own paths, without their faiths, no smiles to be found upon their faces, no happiness or joy to be found in them. It was hard to see them in this state, soulless husks of my family. As James extended a small, hastily scribbled note, his eyes held a mix of desperation and fear. "Please tell me you have nothing to do with this," he pleaded. The note, I knew, was a secret message among those of us planning our escape from this oppressive camp. The daily toll of lives lost had driven us to the brink, leaving us with no choice but to risk everything for freedom. "Yes, I am involved," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "We have to get out of here. They're killing us one by one. I'm getting Mary out." The news of my plan ignited a storm of emotions within James and Ruth. Their initial anger was understandable. The thought of their loved ones risking their lives filled them with dread. Yet, as the gravity of our situation sank in, their anger began to dissipate, replaced by a growing realization that escape was not merely a desire, but a necessity. "How could you even think about doing something so reckless?" James demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Do you have any idea what could happen to you?" I tried to remain calm, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I know the risks, James," I replied, "but we can't just sit here and wait for our fate. We have to take action." "What if we fail?" he countered. "What if we're caught?" "We can't let fear hold us back," I insisted. "We have to trust in God and hope for the best." James's eyes narrowed. "God? Is that all you have to go on? Hope?" "It's more than that," I replied. "It's faith. Faith that God will see us through this." James remained silent for a long moment, his thoughts churning. Finally, he sighed. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "It's too dangerous." I reached out and took his hand. "You don't have to do it alone," I said. "We're all in this together." James looked at me with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I just don't want to lose you," he said. "We won't lose each other," I promised. "Not if we have faith." Eventually, James relented. He agreed to join us in the escape plan, though his doubts remained. As we prepared for our departure, I couldn't help but feel a sense of both excitement and trepidation. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew that together we would face it with courage and faith. Journal entry 39. Over the next several days, we began to formulate our escape plan. Though not entirely detailed, we agreed on a few key points. First, we needed to determine our exact location to plan our post-escape route. Second, we needed to acquire tools and supplies for both the breakout and our journey afterward. This proved challenging as all tools were accounted for and locked away after our daily labor shifts. We decided our best chance for escape lay in the wall we were forced to build, but creating a weak point would be a significant hurdle. Next, we needed a diversion to minimize casualties during the escape. However, a deep division emerged within the group regarding the treatment of the guards. While I advocated for sparing their lives, James and Ruth favored a more violent approach. The debate over the guards' fate mirrored similar debates and discussions of our religious history. The principle of an eye for an eye, often justified. Retaliation and vengeance, a concept found in the Mosaic Law, even in its day, was a challenge to separate between judicial and personal. However, Jesus' teachings emphasize forgiveness, turning the other cheek, and even going to the extent of saying to love your enemy. These contrasting perspectives highlighted the moral complexities of our situation and the difficult choices we faced. We can't simply let them go, James argued. They're the entire reason and cause of our suffering. They've beaten, starved, and killed us. They have been the predicators of our misery. But taking their lives won't bring back the dead, I countered. It won't undo the pain we've endured. It will only perpetuate the cycle of violence. It's about justice, James insisted. They deserve to pay for their crimes. Justice isn't about revenge, and vengeance is the Lord's to take, not us, I replied. It's about restoring order and ensuring that such atrocities never happen again. That is exactly my point, John. With the guard out of the picture, they can't commit those atrocities anymore. They are nothing but a stain upon humanity. James sternly rebutted. You are willing to become what we hate so much? What God hates, I brokenheartedly replied. The debate raged on, each of us clinging to our own beliefs. In the end, the group's desire for retribution prevailed. As we prepared for our escape, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The choice to take a life, even that of an enemy, was a heavy burden to bear. I didn't know if we took this path if we would make it out. Was this the path God wanted for us? Was this something our souls could come back from? Journal entry 40. Unbeknownst to us, the guards had secretly abducted a handful of the faithful while we were engrossed in our debate. Given the camp's immense size, it was no surprise that we hadn't noticed their disappearance. Our numbers were as vast as an ant colony, and the guards, like a child with a magnifying glass, had plucked away individual ants one by one. Although we didn't realize it at once, it took many hours for us to find that certain faithful we could not find. The realization of our losses hit us like a cold slap to the face. We had been so focused on our own survival and the fate of the group that we had failed to notice the growing threat lurking among us. The guard, ever vigilant, had exploited our preoccupation to seize their captives. We thought we had the upper hand, only to find out we weren't even playing the same game. Our escape plan, once filled with hope and determination, was now clouded by a sense of despair. The missing faithful were more than just individuals. They were our friends, our family. Henry Jackman, Jeremiah Davidson, Samantha Takahashi, Dr. Drews, Mary Douglas. Their absence left a gaping hole in our ranks, a reminder of the ruthless efficiency of our captors. As we grappled with the news of their abduction, we were forced to confront the harsh reality of our situation. The guards, far from being passive observers, were actively working against us. They were not merely enforcers of a cruel regime, but cunning predators preying upon our vulnerabilities. The loss of our comrades served as a severe reminder of the dangers that lurked around every corner. We realized that our escape plan would need to be even more meticulous and even more daring if we were to succeed. The stakes had just been raised, and the price of failure had never been higher. The news of our missing comrades ignited a firestorm of rage within our group. Many demanded immediate retribution, their voices filled with a fury that threatened to consume us all. The tensions were palpable, as our once united ranks splintered under the weight of grief and anger. The guards, sensing our growing unrest, stacked themselves shoulder to shoulder, creating an impassable wall of armed guards. Their fortifications, armed with deadly weapons, loomed over us like menacing specters. The once familiar camp had transformed into a hostile fortress, a place where every shadow held a threat. Fear and desperation mingled with our anger, creating a toxic brew of emotions that threatened to tear us apart. The guards, their faces etched with a cruel satisfaction, watched our growing turmoil with a perverse glee. They knew that our divisions would weaken us, making us easier to control and conquer. Journal entry 41. The camp commander emerged from the shadows of the fortress, his presence an oppressive force that seemed to distort the air around him. Commander Gray's very aura exuded a palpable malevolence, an icy chill that made the hairs on the back of our necks stand on end. The air was thick with the scent of fear and desperation. With a slow, deliberate stride, he made his way to the center of the camp, his boots crunching ominously on the gravel. His eyes, dark and void of any empathy, swept over us with a predatory gaze. "Your friends," he began, his voice smooth yet laced with a sinister edge, "are merely undergoing a small interrogation. Nothing to worry about. For now." A cold, mocking smile curled on his lips as he produced several of our secret message cards from his pocket, holding them up for everyone to see. The cards, stained with the ink of our covert communications, fluttered in the breeze like taunting reminders of our failed attempts at rebellion. "Lately," Commander Gray continued, his tone dripping with malice, "we've noticed an increase in unauthorized activities during labor hours. And these," he let the cards dangle provocatively before us. "They've become quite the concern." He paused, savoring the growing dread in our eyes before his expression hardened. "Now, you have a choice. You can allow us to conduct these interrogations as we always have, efficiently and with minimal fuss, or," his voice dropped to a low, venomous whisper, "if you insist on causing further unrest and pushing the boundaries, we will be forced to take more creative measures." A chilling silence enveloped the camp as Commander Gray's gaze grew more intense. "Those of you who resist," he said slowly, enunciating each word with deliberate cruelty, "could find yourselves repurposed as fertilizer and scarecrows in the garden, your very essence used to cultivate the soil, your blood staining the tents to serve as a constant reminder of your insignificance." His voice rose to a deafening roar, filled with a demonic rage that shook the ground beneath us. "You are nothing! Do you hear me? Nothing!" The sheer intensity of his outburst left us paralyzed with fear. "You all deserve to die," he spat. "But our president, in his infinite mercy, has decreed that you might yet serve a purpose." With a final contemptuous glance, Commander Gray straightened his uniform, smoothing out the creases with a practiced gesture that spoke of his unyielding authority. His parting words echoed through the camp like a death knell. "Remember, you are only alive because it suits our needs. Do not mistake this for leniency." Turning on his heel, he retreated into the fortress, leaving us in the oppressive silence that followed his departure. The shadows of the camp seemed darker, heavier, as if the very walls were closing in on us. The threat of becoming nothing more than a display of defiance loomed over us, a constant reminder of the thin line we walked between survival and obliteration. Our group dispersed. James and Ruth, both red with anger, stormed off toward their tent. I felt as though even more tragedy was about to strike. This unending, unrelenting atrocity would continue. I slowly stumbled my way back to my tent, my every step heavy and labored, as though I were wading through an unseen mire of confusion, heartache, and distress. The camp around me seemed to blur and fade, though once familiar. Surroundings now alien and oppressive. Each breath I took felt like a struggle, each heartbeat a reminder of the turmoil raging inside me. The weight of what had transpired bore down on me, an unbearable burden that threatened to crush my spirit. After everything that had been lost, father, mother, Matt, our village, all the pain and suffering of this camp, and now the threat of losing Mary, I was unsure if I could bear any more. As I approached my tent, the reality of my suffering became too much to bear. I collapsed onto my knees, the ground beneath me feeling both cold and indifferent. My hands dug into the earth, as if seeking some semblance of stability amidst the chaos of my emotions. My cries erupted uncontrollably, raw and unfiltered, as if my very soul were breaking apart. The sound of my anguish echoed in the still night air, a desperate lament that spoke of profound despair and a deep sense of helplessness. I wept openly, my tears flowing like a torrent that seemed endless. Every sob felt like a piece of my shattered heart being torn away, each breath a struggle against the crushing weight of sorrow. Through the haze of my tears and the sharp ache of my grief, I turned my broken heart towards the heavens, my voice, choked and trembling, lifted in a fervent plea to God. Each word was a desperate cry for solace, a yearning for some form of divine intervention in the midst of my suffering. My prayer was a tangled mess of emotion, punctuated by the sobs that racked my body, as I sought comfort and strength from the one who could understand the depth of my anguish. In that moment of vulnerability, with the world around me seeming to hold its breath, I reached out to God with the fervent hope that amidst my despair, He would hear my cries and provide the mercy and protection I so desperately needed. My spirit was broken, yet the flickering ember of faith within me sought refuge in His. Unending grace, clinging to the hope that even in the darkest hours, there was a glimmer of light and a promise of deliverance. Dear Heavenly Father, in this moment of profound darkness and fear, I come before you with a heavy heart, pleading for your mercy and protection. The shadows of this camp loom large, and the threats of those who seek to break our spirits weigh heavily upon us. I am but a humble servant, seeking refuge in your boundless grace. Lord, your word reminds us of your steadfast love and protection. Psalm 46:1 tells us, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. I cling to this promise, asking you to be our refuge in this time of trial. Shield us from the cruelty and torment that seeks to overwhelm us. Father, your psalmist cried out in Psalm 23:4, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I beseech you to walk with us through this valley of despair, to guide us with your hand, and offer comfort in our fear. Deliver us, Lord, from the hands of our oppressors. As Psalm 4:17 declares, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. We are desperate for your deliverance from this suffering, trusting that you hear our cries and will act on our behalf. Please grant us courage and strength to endure these trials. In Isaiah 1:10, you are promised, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Uphold us, Lord, with your mighty hand, and infuse us with your strength to face whatever lies ahead. Help us, Father, to remain steadfast in our faith, knowing that your love never fails. As Romans 8:28 assures us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Let us trust that even in this suffering, you are working for our good and for your glory. In our vulnerability, we seek your divine intervention and grace. Protect us, deliver us, and let your will be done in our lives. May your light pierce through the darkness and guide us to a place of peace and safety. We place our hope in you, O Lord, for you are our salvation and our shield. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Journal entry 43. This entry is from Mary. It is her testimony of events that she wanted to share with all. Her testimony has been hard to bear witness to as her brother. I hope that her testimony can reach out to those who are in need.
It was just another day. I was headed back from doing my labor shift for the day. I was walking with Samantha. Both of us were exhausted from the heat and placing stones all day. We were talking about how we remember what baths felt like when a group of 5 guards came up to us and told us to follow them to the fortress. Of course, we had no choice, so we followed them, and 3 of them followed behind us. Once we got to the door of the fortress, they grabbed us, blindfolded us, and gagged us. They carried me inside. It was terrifying not knowing where I was going. I had been through interrogations before, but this was different, worse. Their hands gripped my arms and ankles so tightly. It hurt as they carried me down the stairs of the fortress. Occasionally, I would hit the railing or the walls. They finally laid me down on a metal table. My legs, arms, and neck were restrained to the table with tough leather straps. I don't know how long I was laid there blindfolded. It must have been hours. Eventually, I heard the door open and footsteps. The blindfold was taken off, and the bright light shining in my face made it very difficult to see around the dark room. I could see 2 dark silhouettes faintly in the room. One of them approached me, his hand tracing my body as I recoil from his touch. You see, they always try to run away, even if there is nowhere for them to go. This is part of the power we have, the power to control them. It's easy once you break them down to the level of animals. I knew the man's voice well. It was Commander Gray. He led my previous interrogations. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out some paper. Because of the light, I didn't realize what they were at first, but soon I realized they were our coded cards, the ones we used to communicate out in the camp. He started to ask me questions. "What do you know of these?" Commander Gray asked. I didn't give him a response. He tilted his head to one side. I could hear his neck crack as he did it. Silly little girl, you know how these interrogations go. He paused talking while he continued to touch my body. I ask you a question, and you give me the answers I want. His voice trailed off as he grabbed a handful of my coverings. Otherwise, I will force you to give me the answers. He screamed out in anger as he ripped my coverings off, leaving me bare and exposed on the table. As painfully as your conscience can tolerate, he said calmly as he composed himself. He grabbed my face with one of his hands and made sure we made eye contact. You understand, right? I nodded yes as tears filled my eyes and streamed down onto the table. Good. Now again, what do you know of these little cards? He asked again as he held the cards in my face. They look like playing cards with scribbles on them. I forced each word out through my cries. Commander Gray took a deep breath in. Damn you, stupid little whore, he screamed into my ear. My patience is at its end with you people, he said so angrily as he pulled away from my ear. I wish for the day that I can rid myself in this world of you, the stupid and blind. No gods exist. When will you people just accept the truth for what it is and just live a normal life? He continued on and on about how the faithful are a disease, and how normal people have no problems going on in their lives. Give me the answer I want, or I will do some real damage to your body, he commanded. He pulled a long knife out of his belt, letting the tip of the blade run across my body as he waited for my answer. As I laid on the table, the cold point of his knife dragged across me, sending cold shivers up my spine. I thought to myself that I could die. I didn't want to die. The light in the room got brighter. A warmth came over me. Romans 8:35-39 filled my mind. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are counted as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation, will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. I looked at Commander Gray. My life belongs to Jesus Christ, and those cards, I know that they are something you should be afraid of. I eased my body and closed my eyes. He screamed out, his voice so loud and forceful. Damn it, damn it, damn it. With both hands holding his knife, he slammed the point of the blade into my left arm with each of his expletives. The blade went through my arm and hit the metal table. His last slam punctured through the table itself, the blade pinning my arm to the table. I remember the sharp, sudden pain that shot through my arm like a bolt of lightning. The initial shock was so intense that I couldn't move. My arm felt heavy and numb, as if it wasn't connected to my body. Fear washed over me as I realized what had happened. I looked down at my arm and saw blood coming from 2 holes in my arm, the knife still in a third. The pain was excruciating. I couldn't help but scream out in agony. As the adrenaline wore off, the pain became even more intense. I felt a wave of nausea and dizziness. My vision blurred, and I looked back at the light. The warmth returned. My pain wasn't as intense. It was easing away. The other guard that was in the room took a hastened step toward us. Commander Gray yelled at him. Don't you dare, boy. Commander Gray quickly drew his pistol from its holster and pointed it at the other guard. I'm going to get the answers. That I want. Commander Gray growled out, breathing heavily, almost like a feral dog. Shortly after that, the door opened and there were 2 more guards. Sir, there is a group of prisoners forming outside. We can kill them if you'd like. One of them said. No, I will be there in a moment. He calmly stated as he straightened his appearance. We wouldn't want to spill any unwarranted blood. Now would we, he said mischievously as he walked towards the door. Once the door was shut, the guard rushed over to me. In a frantic voice, he said, No, I hope it's not too late. I remembered his voice. I'll always remember his voice. Okay, this is going to hurt for a bit. But I'm going to help, he said in a comforting way. He untied the leather straps around my arms, feet, and neck. "David? It really you?" I asked softly. Caught off guard, "How do you know my name?" Tears again filled my eyes as my previous trauma at his hands flooded into my mind. "No, stay away. Don't touch me. Please, not again," I screamed through my sobbing. "I'm sorry, please just trust me now. I'm not going to do anything to you except get you help and get you out of here," he said. The trauma overwhelmed me, and with my right arm, I swung at him, slapping him, trying to keep him from me. "We don't have time for this," he said under his breath. "I'm sorry," he said directly at me as our eyes met. He yanked the knife out of the table, my pain flooding back into my arm. He grabbed a long strip of cloth and wrapped it around the wounds in my arms securely. He grabbed my torn coverings off the ground and covered me the best he could. He spoke to me so softly. "Are you able to walk, or do I need to carry you?" He waited for an answer. "I can walk, I think," I whispered, still not aware of his plans. "Okay, stay close and do as I say," he commanded. I nodded my head in compliance. He grabbed my hand and led me out of the room. We entered a stone hallway, in contrast to the metal room we were just in. He directed us down the left corridor towards a dark room, lit by a single light shining on a set of metal stairs in the center of the room. We approached the bottom of the stairs. We could hear voices and footsteps coming down towards us. David grabbed my hand and rushed me over to the corner of the room, in the shadows. He placed me in the corner. He then pressed himself against me in the corner, covering us in a black blanket. He looked down at me. "I'm sorry for everything, but please be quiet. If they find us, they will kill us both without hesitation," he whispered softly. I was completely lost at the moment. My previous assaulter turned hero. I didn't know if he was telling the truth, or if this was all a ruse. I had hoped it was true. I did believe that it wasn't his true intention at our last interrogation. But the trauma was still aching at me. The voices closer and closer. One of them was Commander Gray. My heart sank thinking about what he did and would do if he found us. He told the guards with him to kill any prisoner who threatened them again. I couldn't help but think that James would more than likely be a prisoner to do that. Their voices trailed off in the corridor. David wrapped up the blanket and we were back on his plan. Going up the metal stairs, it hurt on my bare feet. The metal ridges formed in the stairs for traction, jabbing deep into my feet. David scooped me up into his arms and catching me off guard. "Sorry," he said as he lifted me up. "We need to get out as fast as possible." We finally got to the top, and I could see the doorway out. There was a guard down the hallway towards the door. The guard asked out, "What is she doing out here?" I thought Commander Gray was planning on killing them all. David wittingly retorted, "I thought so too, but when he got down there he said to release her. I don't know what's going on anymore." He continued to walk towards the guard. I trailed behind him. Unknowing of his plan, I sheepishly followed, terrified of this all being a game for them. Out of nowhere, David punched the guard in the face and tackles him onto the ground. Completely shocked, I froze in the hallway. Punch after punch David delivered. The guard's helmet wobbled around on the floor of the hallway. I remember David picking up the helmet and smashing it down onto the guard's head, and again, I heard a loud crack. David tossed the helmet to the other side of the hallway, turned and faced me, his face and chest covered in blood. He got up and ran back towards me. He said, "I'm sorry, but I think your God would forgive me in this instance." While trying to get his breath back, he grabbed my hand again. I was still shocked and stunned by what I witnessed. We started walking towards the door when the ground beneath us started to rumble. It started to shake violently. The walls and ground started to form cracks. David grabbed my hand and we ran toward the door as the earthquake ripped through the fortress.
Journal entry 44. It was a moment of profound peace, a tranquil pause after a fervent prayer. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if listening intently. But that tranquility was shattered in an instant. The earth beneath me rumbled, a low, ominous growl that quickly crescendoed into a terrifying roar. The camp was jolted awake by the seismic upheaval. The ground seemed to writhe and twist beneath our feet, as if possessed by an unseen force. A fissure tore through the camp, its jagged edges swallowing everything in its path. The wall, a testament to our labor and resilience, was split in two, its once impenetrable barrier crumbling into rubble. The sight of the breached wall filled me with hope, an escape. Then my mind filled with concern. Mary, locked away somewhere within the fortress, was my sole focus. I sprang to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest, and raced towards the fortress. Chaos had descended upon the camp. Some sought refuge in the remaining structures, while others seized the opportunity to flee. The guard were as disoriented as the rest of us. Some rushed to the breached wall to prevent escape, their faces etched with fear and determination. Others wandered aimlessly, their strength shattered by the terrifying spectacle unfolding before them. Soon, the once united camp was engulfed in a bitter conflict. Faithful and guard were now locked in a deadly struggle. The air was filled with the deafening roar of Excaliburs, as fire, smoke, and lead filled the sky and bodies fell. As I raced towards the fortress, my mind was consumed by a single terrifying thought, Mary. I had to reach her no matter what, but fate had other plans. A crack, a menacing line of weakness, appeared at the base of the fortress. It grew with terrifying speed, snaking upwards like a hungry serpent. My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat of fear and desperation. I pushed myself. Harder, every ounce of strength I possessed channeled into my legs. I had to be there for her. The fortress, once a symbol of oppression and fear, was reduced to a pile of rubble in an instant. The towering structure that had dominated the landscape was now a shattered remnant of its former self. My heart sank, a heavy weight settling in my chest. My soul ached with a pain so deep it threatened to consume me. I screamed, a raw, anguished cry that echoed through the devastated camp. How could this happen again? Why did tragedy always seem to find me? How much loss could one person endure? I stumbled towards the remains of the front door, my body moving on autopilot as my mind reeled from the horror. Guard bodies lay scattered around, a grim testament to the fierce tragedy that had raged. My eyes were fixed on the ruins, a blank stare that reflected the emptiness within. With each step, my sorrow deepened, a heavy weight settling in my chest. I reached out to grasp the door handle, my fingers trembling. The mangled door was locked, its weight pinned down by the fallen structure. I braced myself against the rubble, my muscles straining as I exerted every ounce of strength. The door groaned, resisting my efforts. With a final, desperate heave, it creaked open, revealing a glimpse of the interior. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered inside. There she was, my sister, covered in dust and dirt. Her clothes were torn, and her arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, blood, staining the surrounding area. A guard lay beside her, his body shielding her from the debris. His face was streaked with tears, a significant difference to the dust and grime that covered him. I recognized him instantly. He was the one who had violated my sister, the one who had brought such unspeakable harm to her. A surge of rage erupted within me, a consuming inferno that threatened to obliterate everything in its path. The sight of him, lying there, his actions having caused such immense suffering, ignited a fury that threatened to consume me. Journal entry 45. I tried. I really tried, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sobs that racked his body. Tears streamed down his face, leaving trails of salt on his dirt-streaked skin. What happened? I asked, my body moving on autopilot as I knelt beside them. I gently brushed the hair from my sister's face, my touch a tender caress amidst the chaos. I was trying to help, he continued, his voice trembling. But then everything fell apart. I thought I could make a difference. I watched my sister's chest rise and fall, a faint rhythm amidst the devastation. Let me take her, I said, scooping her up into my arms. The camp is in chaos. If you still want to help her, guide us. Get us out of here safely, I said firmly, meeting his gaze. I can do that, he replied, rising to his feet. Follow me. I know where the keys to the rigs are. He took the lead. His limp, a subtle notice of the pain he had endured, was chased away by his determined stride. I noticed a trail of blood trailing behind him, a testament to his own injuries. Despite the pain, he moved with purpose and speed. We navigated the camp, weaving through tents and avoiding the chaos that had engulfed it. David led us towards a familiar destination. There were two areas of the camp that were off limits: the fortress, a towering structure on the north side, and a mysterious section to the southeast corner. The wall on that side was the original, a massive 50-foot tall barrier that dwarfed the rest of the camp. It was heavily guarded, with multiple sentries and machine guns positioned along its length. From behind a tent, a shout erupted, shattering the tent's silence. "You bastard!" James emerged, a fury in his eyes. He charged towards David, his movements a blur of rage. With a powerful tackle, he sent David crashing to the ground, his fists raining down in a violent assault. David defended himself with remarkable strength, his face partially shielded from the onslaught. Ruth, close behind, pursued James, her steps filled with a desperate determination. As James and David grappled on the ground, Ruth seized the opportunity, delivering a vicious kick to David's head. The blow forced David to drop his guard, exposing his face to James's relentless attack. I rushed forward, gently placing Mary on the ground. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice filled with urgency. "He's trying to help us escape. He saved Mary." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. My siblings continued their brutal assault, their anger blinding them to reason. I dove, tackling James off David, our bodies rolling across the ground in a chaotic struggle. Ruth, shocked by my intervention, rushed to James's aid. As we finally separated, James landed a powerful punch, shattering my nose. Blood streamed down my face. Both James and Ruth were taken aback by my actions. "What the hell, John?" James demanded, his anger momentarily tempered. "He's guiding us out of here," I replied, the pain in my nose a distant ache compared to the turmoil within. "You're trusting the guy who raped Mary? What the hell is wrong with you?" James exclaimed, stepping away from me. "This bastard is going to get what he deserves. If he doesn't die, he'll wish he was," he mocked, stepping over the still dazed David. James dropped onto David, his fists a blur of violence. Ruth stood, indecisively torn between descending into darkness like James or choosing the honorable path. "Stop!" A soft whisper echoed through the chaos. "I said stop it," the voice repeated, gaining strength. "James, stop it!" Mary cried out, her voice hoarse and strained. She had awakened, her body barely supporting her weight. James paused, his movements frozen by Mary's plea. "Stop it, James. Let him go," Mary insisted. "No, I can't let this scumbag off the hook," James replied angrily. "But he did those things to me, and I forgive him," Mary said softly, as she looked into David's eyes. David looked back at Mary, his bloodied face a canvas of raw emotion. Tears welled up in his eyes, a contrasting level of humility compared to the brutality he had endured. James was stunned, his anger momentarily extinguished by this unexpected revelation. But the fire within him quickly reignited, a roaring inferno that threatened to consume him. He raised his fist, a weapon of fury, his gaze alternating between Mary and David. David, accepting his fate, nodded, his eyes closed in a silent farewell. The tension in the air was palpable, a suffocating weight that pressed down on us all. James lowered his arms, his anger deflated. He stood, dusting himself off, a defeated figure. James and Ruth sought solace in each other, their shared pain a fragile bond in the midst of chaos. I crawled towards David, my heart aching for him. Mary joined me, her concern evident in her eyes. I tried to wipe the blood from David's face, but it was a futile effort. The blood seemed to seep from his wounds, a constant reminder of the brutality he had endured. Our family was divided, a chasm separating those who had embraced darkness and those who clung to hope. James and Ruth had chosen the path of despair, their souls consumed by anger and hatred. Struggled to rise, my body aching from the ordeal. With a concerted effort, I pulled myself to my feet. Reaching down, I offered David a helping hand. Ruth assisted Mary even in her darkness. Ruth had a flicker of light left. Journal entry 46. The five of us navigated the chaos that had enveloped the camp. Faithful and guard were engaged in a brutal struggle, their fists and blades a blur of violence. A sea of humanity surged through the breached section of the wall, their faces a mix of terror and desperation. As we approached the southeast corner, a massive metal door, embedded in the stone wall, loomed before us. This was it, the gateway to the restricted zone, our potential salvation from this camp. James and David, their strength united, pulled on the door with all their might. The heavy metal groaned and creaked, finally yielding to their combined efforts. The door swung open, revealing a cavernous chamber carved into the stone. It resembled a hangar, but with a more ancient, ghostly aura. Rows of vehicles, their sturdy bulk gleaming in the dim light, lined the interior. David pointed towards an armored vehicle with 6 wheels, its imposing presence, a shielded mobile shelter for us. "Get inside through the back," David commanded, his voice firm. James rushed ahead, opening the rear hatch. It swung down like a drawbridge, revealing a dark, inviting interior. I crawled inside, helping Mary to follow. I secured her in her seat, her face a mixture of relief and hope. James assisted Ruth, who sat beside Mary, her arm wrapped protectively around her. By the time we were all settled, David returned, his arms laden with supplies. Uniforms, bedding, rations, and weapons were piled haphazardly in his embrace. David tossed the supplies into the back of the vehicle, his movements efficient and purposeful. "Here are some clothes, put them on to blend in," he stated firmly. "And there's plenty of food, but don't eat too much at once. We can't afford to lose anyone because of gluttony," he added, closing the hatch. "Thank you, David," I replied, taking a deep breath. The enemy uniforms felt foreign and uncomfortable, a far cry from the familiar and disheveled rags we had worn for so long, but somehow brought a feeling of freedom compared to the rags of slavery. Ruth assisted Mary, her movements gentle and reassuring. "You'll be okay, Mary," Ruth whispered, her voice soft. The vehicle rumbled to life, its engine a powerful heartbeat that filled the confined space. We began to move, the windowless vehicle providing both security and a sense of isolation. The anxiety-filled darkness that enveloped us was a world apart from the chaotic catastrophe we had left behind. "Where are we going?" James asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. "I don't know. Las Vegas is the closest super city," David replied. "We'll need to stop there for more supplies, but we can't stay too long. There would be too many questions from officials. Plus, we also need to get as far away from Camp Sanguine Lapis." "Las Vegas? But isn't that where the headquarters for the guard is?" James inquired, an expression of fear come down upon his face. "Yes, and that is why we can't be there too long. We need to get supplies, maybe clean up a bit, and then get back out on the road." David quipped back at James, "Montana and Greater Dakota are fairly empty of the guard nowadays. Or we could go there, maybe." His voice trailed off as his focus was on driving. At that moment, we were uncertain of what the future held. But it seemed as though this horrific chapter in our lives was drawing to a close. I glanced at my siblings, their faces a testament to the relief that washed over us. Tears of joy streamed down our cheeks as we smiled and held hands, a silent promise of hope. Journal entry 47. 7 years have passed since we left the camp. For a total of 2 years, 9 months, and 16 days, we endured unimaginable trials. Our souls and bodies were pushed to their limits, but we persevered. And for what? Our escape from the camp was just the beginning. It was the day of the earthquake, the day that God saved us. And since then, the world has changed. A revival has spread like wildfire, bringing hope and salvation to countless souls. Our journey has not been easy, but it has been worth it. The memories of our struggles may fade, but the impact of our actions will live on forever. Our senses were overwhelmed, our bodies exhausted, but our spirits were never broken. And now, as we look back on our journey, we can see the true power of faith and perseverance. Once we got to Las Vegas, we decided to go to Montana to seek refuge from the guard. The journey was long and treacherous, with the guard hot on our trail. We traveled through barren landscapes, facing danger at every turn. However, along the way, we also encountered pockets of hope. We stumbled upon villages scattered in secluded areas, where other faithful were hiding and surviving. These small communities welcomed us with open arms, providing us with shelter, food, and much-needed rest. It was comforting to know that we were not alone in this fight against the guard. As we continued on our journey, we also came across townships throughout the land that were not of faithful. These communities were also being oppressed by the guard, but they refused to give up their beliefs and way of life. We shared our stories with them, spreading the word of faith and the word of God. It was heartening to see their determination and resilience in the face of such cruel oppression. Despite our efforts, for some, spreading the word of faith was not enough. James and Ruth decided to leave us in pursuit of a more physical plan of action. James, still consumed by darkness and his desire for vengeance, wanted to prevent the continuation of the guard by any means necessary. Ruth, a child of both light and dark, became James's counsel, ensuring that he saw logic and morality in his tactics. Together, they formed an insurgency of faithful and non-faithful, a formidable force to fight back against the guard. David, who had joined us on our journey, had also given his life to Christ. He was now dedicated to righting his wrongs and had become the primary protector of my sister Mary. With his knowledge of how the guard operated, he became an invaluable asset to our cause. The guard's grip on Europe, Asia, and Africa is quickly slipping away. Reports are coming in that they have lost control in these regions. This is a major blow to their forces and a sign of the insurgency's growing strength. With the fall of these territories, The Guard's power and authority are diminishing. In Australia, the Guard has lost all of its prison camps and only has 2 outposts left. This is a significant loss for them, as Australia was once a key stronghold for their forces. The remaining outposts are now vulnerable and at risk of being overthrown by the insurgency. The Guard's hold on the continent is tenuous at best. The fighting in South America has been particularly brutal, with no signs of slowing down. The conflict has been raging for 4 years now and shows no signs of ending anytime soon. The more outposts and camps that are taken from the Guard, the more desperate and violent their actions become. The insurgency is determined to rid the continent of the Guard's presence, and they are willing to pay any price to achieve their goal. North America remains the only continent where the Guard holds significant power. Despite the successful liberation of Alaska, Greater Dakota, Montana, and the western half of Canada, the Guard's stronghold remains. The insurgency forces have achieved much, but there is still more to be done if they are to end the tyranny of the Guard. However, the people of North America are still under the cruel rule of the Guard. Their grip on the continent is tight, and the insurgency must tread carefully if they are to continue their fight, as they continue their struggle. Against the Guard, the insurgency forces are aware of the importance of North America. If they can free this continent, the rest of the world will surely follow. The Guard knows this too, and they will do everything in their power to maintain control. The fate of the world rests on the shoulders of the brave individuals fighting for freedom in North America. I received a letter from James and Ruth last week, which inspired me to write all of this down. They're planning something in Las Vegas, but they didn't give details. I wanted to make sure the story is written and never forgotten. The battle of light and dark, good and evil, may possibly always be. But those who have lost their lives, those like Henry Jackman, Jeremiah Davidson, Samantha Takahashi, Dr. Drews, and countless others, this is also their story. A story of faith, hope, dedication, and endurance. Those who find this and read it, I hope that God blesses you. I hope you find His strength in times of darkness. David knows, Mary knows, and I know God is good. God is love. God saves.